Howdy, howdy. We are live on another Friday night. I'm ready to talk some Star Trek Deep Space Nine in just a moment. I see we already have some people in the live audience. It's going to be an exciting show. We're discussing the final 8 episodes from what season, Dave?
Season 6.
Season 6.
Why? I feel like that was a test.
No, it's just because it's just boring if like the same voice is just talking.
Okay, all right. Oh, that's fair enough.
Instead of me giving all the information, I'll just give like 80% of it and then let you fill in
Sure.
20%.
Every
But
once in a while, I'm not going to be paying attention, and I'm just going to be like, What'd you just say?"
well,
Uh,
it'll keep you on your toes, perhaps.
but yeah, season 6, a season of great note.
Yeah, my personal favorite, but I don't love everything in it. There's some stuff here I'm going to complain about, but also plenty that I'm going to praise.
It should be
So
an interesting. I think it'll be an interesting one to talk about, even the stuff that's a little off.
yeah, we'll go ahead and get the show started. I'm Fatheree,
This is Dave.
and this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 226th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek, old and new, and tonight we are talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 6. We are focusing on the final 8 episodes of Season 6, so that's going to be everything from episode 19 in the Pale Moonlight, all the way up to the season finale, Tears of the Prophets. That first episode, Dave, that's a big one. I know you just saw it for the first time, so this will be the first time anyone's heard your thoughts on it.
Get ready to be disappointed. No, no,
You
it's
liked
going to be
it even
exciting.
less than you liked Far Beyond the Stars, right?
And we finally got to the place I knew was coming, but I never knew we were going to get there. But we got to spoiler warning, Dax's death.
Yes. Also, one of the most hated episodes of all of DS9 is also in the mix here. So,
Right. I think I know the one it is, but yeah, yeah.
so yeah, it's gonna be a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Before we do that, I just need to, as always, give a huge thank you and shout out to all of the lovely patrons out there. Love seeing y'all in the audience, those that are here, and everyone else who will be watching or listening later. Thank all of you so very much for chipping in and helping us continue to do the show. We do a lot of content, Dave. We do this weekly, and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of expenses also. So I think it would just be like demoralizing, like to just do this alone without other people helping out. It just
It's been a big thing, I think, for me to not just even pre sort of Patreon, but to like have the increased sort of interaction with the audience here, to have moved to live streaming and being able to bounce off people's comments is that whole thing has made it a lot more exhilarating for me. It feels more Trek, more community, so I'm all about that.
Yeah, it's been great. But thank you to Starfleet Boy, Cake is Eternal, Gay Clevin Lundstrom, Crazy Dutchie, Joanne Robertson, Quarkspar, John Dawes, Geek Filter, Earl Grey Trekkie, and our anonymous supporters. To celebrate, we will continue to do our monthly watch-alongs. Our next one is planned for February 11th. This is going to be right before Picard Season 3 kicks off. We're going to be watching the TNG episode Attached. So anyone who's in our Patreon. If you want to sign up between now and then, you'll be invited. We do these fun live watch parties where we can watch at the same time and talk about it while we're watching. And this episode Attached is going to be kind of an interesting one to revisit, because that is the one where, if you don't remember, Dr. Crusher and Picard have that telepathic link when they're trying to escape captivity, and they see that there's romantic feelings they have for each other. And if you're into like the Picard Crusher shipping territory at all, even if you just kind of dabble shipping Picard and Crusher, I think season 3 of Picard is already kind of on your radars. Like, maybe they are finally going to get together, and I think this episode might be an interesting touchstone for whatever happens with their dynamic in the Star Trek yet to come in Picard season 3.
The episode that launched 1,000 ships. You can't deny what you say internally, and that's also, by the way, a great device for that kind of thing. Like,
it's a good sci-fi, a good way of like blending kind of sci-fi and romance genres together for an interesting, unique story. But yeah, the Patreon, you can come in as little as $2 per month, or if you want to chip in more generously, there's some additional perks as well. We finally have a Division 14 member in our Patreon, and that's Earl Grey Trekkie, or Robbie, who's being very generous with us. So is another cool thing about coming in at that level is that you get to be in the rotation of picking the episodes for the watch parties. So we'll have I don't know what episode we'll be watching in March. That'll be up to Earl Grey Trekkie to decide.
I'm excited, actually. I kind of like the danger.
When he's like, I'm going to pick Threshold every time it's my turn.
You know what? That's going to be a good watch. We're still going to have fun.
It might get old after a while, but...
That's the Voyager one, right?
Yeah, that's the catfish one.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, we will go ahead and get into our DS9 talk now, because there's a lot here. And if you want to help us out while we're talking, you can always chip in a super chat. That's also a fun way to support. We'll drop whatever we're talking about and read your comments. So you can make me and Dave say anything you want with the super chat if you're watching us live on YouTube. But the first episode, we're just gonna start big, right? We got a big one right out of the gate with season 6, episode 19, In the Pale Moonlight. And this episode was written by Michael Taylor, a story by Peter Allen Fields, and directed by Victor Lobel. I'm just gonna read the quick synopsis here, and then we'll get into it. But the synopsis reads: with mounting losses in the Federation Dominion War and the specter of defeat, Captain Sisko enlists Garrick's help to persuade is in quotation marks, to persuade the Romulans to join the Federation Klingon Alliance to win the war. However, Sisko soon learns that to save the Federation, he may have to betray the values it stands for. So, Dave, before you tell us how you feel about this one, I just want to point out that I had mentioned to you before that Ira Steven Behr, showrunner on DS9, he was a big John Wayne fan. Mm-hmm. And there's this famous story, the TNG episode, what is it? Where Picard goes to Risa. Captain's Holiday, duh. Okay. So Captain's Holiday. Ira Steven Behr originally had this idea that, okay, for Picard's vacation, what he does on his PTO, I don't remember the exact details, but it's something where he would go somewhere where, like, to challenge yourself, you go into this room and you face your greatest fear or something like that. It almost sounds like something like would have been like in like the Picard TV show, not so much like in TNG.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it. But anyways, Ira Steven Behr was, writing this episode, and Gene Roddenberry was still, involved with Next Generation at that point, season 3 of TNG. And Gene looks at the script and he says, "Oh no, Captain Picard, he's a evolved man of the 24th century. He has no fear. He's like a perfect hero. He's fearless." And Ira Steven Behr is like, "What do you mean he has no fear? We all have fear, right?" And Gene Roddenberry's like, No, shut up. I'm the boss. I'm the great bird of the galaxy. Picard has no fear. Instead, he should like go on vacation and go somewhere where he gets laid." and that's what Ira Stephen Bear ended up having to write. But part of Gene Roddenberry's objection, I promise I'm going somewhere with this. It'll get to in the Pale Moonlight in just a moment. But part of Roddenberry's objection was he's a perfect hero. He's like John Wayne. And Roddenberry, I guess, didn't know this, but Ira Stephen Bear just happens to be a huge John Wayne fan. He grew up a big John Wayne fanboy. A lot of people did. He watched all the Western movies, all the classics. And he's like, what do you mean John Wayne had no fear? He's like this perfect hero and he's like, no, he's played a lot of like flawed, complex guys. But Gene Roddenberry was the boss. And so Ira Stephen Bear couldn't tell that story he wanted to tell. But here on Deep Space Nine, in this episode, in the Pale Moonlight, it has like the very famous, very iconic ending of Sisko saying, I can live with it. And I've heard Ira Stephen Bear say that like he was basing that on, I've never seen the movie, but the man who shot Liberty Valance.
Yeah.
Have you seen it, Dave?
No.
Well, I guess spoilers for that movie, but somewhere like John Wayne kills someone, and at the end he says something like it was cold-blooded murder, but I can live with it.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think this episode, a big part of it was kind of like Ira Stephen Bear, like, no, I'm gonna get the last word on this whole like the Star Trek captains. Are they the perfect hero? Or are they like John Wayne? Like no, Gene. Like this is I am the showrunner of a Star Trek show. I am a huge John Wayne fan, and let me set it straight. This is the story that I want to tell of testing that idea of like that perfect evolved man of the 24th century. So.
I'll say this, Fatheree. You could do like that. That make it. If I knew that and I had gone into the episode knowing that, perhaps, or more heightened aware of it, I might have been almost like looking for it and seen it as more of like a personal statement that was like too meta or something like that. But this is actually, I feel like, the ideal way to do that because it's an episode that stands completely on its own merits, fits all the themes of Deep Space Nine, stuff they've been building since forever, and it's so it's not like I watched that and I was like, oh, I just watched somebody's treatise or thesis or something like that to justify himself. So thank God for that. That's and sometimes writers can do that. When a writer gets too preachy, that's a version of that.
Sure, yeah. But no, that's a story I just learned like a couple years ago. I actually learned that it was Ira Stephen Bear appearing on a podcast. I've never seen it like written down anywhere. Hopefully I remembered it well enough. But yeah, I mean, this episode, it is like the big famous one of, I guess, Sisko, like the thing he says at the end, where, I was an accessory to murder. I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men. But, if I could do it all over again, I would, and I can live with it. But it's been very controversial, like the whole 25 years since this episode's come out. Like I did remember it being a big talking point back then. It was a big point of discussion in more recent times. But Dave, I just want to get like your opinion on it. Like do you feel like did they cross the bridge? Did this go like too dark for Star Trek, or
I almost feel like
it?
You cannot, in a way you can't in good faith, if you've enjoyed Deep Space Nine's themes up until this point, you can't say that it went too far because that has been the theme of Deep Space Nine, is about that sort of, that harsh level of testing to, see heroes with their resources dwindling put to the test. So I was extremely involved with this from the very beginning. There was something about the fact that Sisko, as he recorded his journal, was looking at the audience. It was a confessional, right? It was really intense, and so I was really drawn into that. I didn't know that was a thing. I felt when I was watching this, kind of like sometimes like when you watch something like Casablanca or The Godfather or something, where there's all this pop cultural kind of baggage to it, right? I know the lines.
Yeah.
I've seen a million memes of it's a fake. I've seen a million memes that have some version of Sisko's end speech in it. Although I will say this, in the last couple of years, I kind of started looking past those, so I didn't think too much about them. They weren't as memorized in my head, and I could try and see it fresh. And luckily, turns out I did not have all the context I sort of thought I did. And was able to sort of really see it on its own merits and go on that journey to feel Sisko's desperation and exhaustion. And I had no idea that Garrick was like so vitally a part of this, for better or worse. This is like a shining moment for him, of how dark he can be, and yet maybe save the freaking Federation right there, the Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah, this is, I think, like the big Garrick episode of like
Yeah.
anything that Andy Robinson's contributed to Star Trek. He's so incredible in this, and what the part that like really sells is like there at the end, when Cisco is livid and comes down to the tailor's shop, like, oh my god, now I see what you were doing all along. You arranged this assassination of the senator. Like, what have I gotten myself into? But then like the way that like Garrick calms Cisco down and reels him in just by laying out his plan and how perfect and flawless it works. Because really and truly, like what they do to the Dominion here, like imagine if you were the Romulans and Wayun or some other Vorta comes to you and they're like, oh my goodness, we would never assassinate one of your senators returning from a diplomatic mission. Like we have no plans for hostility against Romulus. Like can you imagine like the Dominion saying that and just like, okay, y'all are sneaky, backstabby people. There is zero way we're going to give y'all the benefit of the doubt on this one.
Yeah, it's one of those things. There's a side of me that's like the notion of years ago there was a comic called Identity Crisis from DC. Had lots of problems, but a little small side thing is that the Justice League does some morally dubious stuff in it, and they say somebody has a line where Superman, who has super hearing and was meant to have like overheard what they were going to do. Somebody, maybe Batman, says Superman hears what he wants to hear and sees what he wants to see. And so the implication was that Superman heard what they were doing and looked the other way. And this is kind of what happened here in Deep Space Nine. Cisco knew what was happening and looked the other way. And I think I never was able to sort of reconcile it with Superman. With Deep Space Nine, it felt like it made sense with the desperation at the level that they had shown us. The war past the tipping point. We are going to lose everything. It made sense to put you in their shoes and see why they would do that. How you could be taken to that place. And I think there's a reasonable debate to be had. There's people I would understand if somebody didn't like the episode or felt it was betraying Trek's principles, because the writers put them in that situation, right? They put them in a situation where it had to happen, but it felt real to me. It felt like it reflected a real world thing, and like something that is going to happen even if we're in a utopian society. If we're going to have aggression, then this is something that is going to potentially come up. These kind of compromises.
I mean, and it's something that I've wrestled with over the years, and I've always loved this episode. I've always loved Deep Space Nine, but like, is it appropriate for Star Trek to even do this? And I mean, like, I guess the comparison you were talking about with Superman and Identity Crisis, the reason why I think this does work so much better is at the end, Cisco does hate himself.
Right.
If
I'm not mistaken, I've really only seen this once. He says I can live with it, but doesn't he repeat it? And then there's almost like this edge to his voice, like he's not sure if he can live with it.
Right, like he's trying to tell himself, like,
right, he's convincing himself.
Come on, Ben, you can live with this. You can do it. This is just another job, right. another part of wearing the uniform.
And then duty. It goes from being almost this slight bravado, like I did what I had to do, like an action hero kind of badass, and then suddenly he's like, please tell me I did the right thing, to himself.
It is his confession where he's taking off his uniform as if like he's like removing like the Starfleet of him, but it's also, kind of symbolic of he's like burying his chest to the audience, and the breaking of the fourth wall when he's looking. It's just it's so artfully done, like it's so tasteful and just like such high caliber quality. It's
right.
Even if you disagree with like the principles of this episode or the message of it, it's like
the craft of it is undeniable.
Yes, for a show that was in like direct syndication in 1998, this is ridiculously good.
It also, early on, I noticed it had elements of what would become the backbone of his Battlestar Galactica run. We've talked about this before. Talking about Ron Moore, specifically.
Who doesn't get the script credit on this, but I'm so glad you brought that up, Dave, because he actually did the final pass of the script. But
it makes sense. But, the casualty lists
Hmm.
and that sort of sense of
That hopelessness.
that hopelessness. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I noticed that they continue to amp up the aggression of the what do you call it, the Dominion
Hmm.
with places that we the audience know. So Beta Z,
Yeah,
the
Beta Z falling. That was like the big catalyst. That's like the straw that
yeah,
broke the camel's back here.
and eventually we're going to hear Vulcan start getting mentioned, and so not in this
And
episode, I think, but
yeah, and just to remind everyone, the point that we're at in the war is, the Dominion had DS9. The Klingons and Federation were able to recapture it. But since then, they're just trying to hold the Dominion in Cardassian space. But that's proven to be too difficult. They're starting to encroach into Federation territory. They don't have DS9 anymore, but they're capturing other planets, other systems like Beta Z, and the idea here is that like the Dominion, they can like build ships really quickly. They can clone new Jem'Hadar soldiers really quickly, and their numbers are going up, while the Federation and the Klingons, they're losing ships, they're losing people, they're losing ground. They're going to lose this war, and a lot of people, I think, return to this episode more often than the rest of the season. I'm, a weirdo who's like always constantly re watching Star Trek in order. So I always try to keep this in context, but if you look at what else has happened in season 6, statistical probability with the augments and Bashir, they told them like, we're probably going to lose if we keep fighting this war, and it will result in 900 billion deaths.
yeah,
So that's what's going to happen if he continues to fight and he loses. But we just talked about, Far Beyond the Stars last week. That whole experience where he had to live as Benny Russell, this black man in the 1950s, that level of like oppression, and like, basically the founders are going to want everyone to, bow down to them and like live under the thumbs of themselves as like the master race. That's what's going to happen if they lose the war. But if he fights it and gets it wrong, it's going to be 900 billion dead, and then everyone has to live like Benny Russell anyways. So not only is he forced to swing, we'll do like a baseball analogy. That's appropriate for Cisco.
yeah, yeah,
Not only is he forced to swing at this pitch, but he has to put some fire on it and hit a home run, or else it's going
right.
to be 900 billion dead. And so with all that in context, and the fact that like Cisco does this and he still kind of hates himself because he didn't go about it the right way, the appropriate way, the way worthy of a Starfleet officer. It's something you said a long time ago, Dave, that, Star Trek should be about, when you combine like logic and science and knowledge and understanding along with, compassion and empathy. And that should be like a force that wins the day, but it shouldn't always win. Like you should have like some defeats on occasion. And
Right.
this was a defeat for Cisco.
Yeah, there's no getting around that. Um, it's I wondered if the loss of Beta Z was meant to feel a little bit like France, or like was it Poland falling?
Yeah,
Um,
it's weird if you try to combine this with like World War II, because like we're after getting pushed out of Deep Space Nine. I guess that would have been like Dunkirk when the British were pushed out of France. So I think like taking the station back, that was like D-Day. That was like, storming the beaches at Normandy.
right.
And so I think this might be like the Battle of the Bulge, where like
I kind of like that.
where the Germans are like pushing back into the Ally
I mean, I think we
lines, I
both
guess.
realize it's not an obvious that they're
Yeah.
using inspiration, but it's not an analog. You know what? I thought before this, I thought that scene where, well, first of all, I knew that he did some sort of trickery from the episode. I didn't know what, from the memes and everything and the just pop culture. I didn't know that it was the plan. I thought that was something that happened near the very end. Like he made some
Mm.
decision, like, oh, what if I do this sneaky thing? And I actually, by the way, thought that the Romulan, it's a fake. That was like, after all was said and done, this guy discovers it, and somehow he's not able to like
Oh.
reveal what he
So you thought that
says.
was going to be like the ending.
I thought it was going to be the ending, so I was incredibly happy to find that happen occur like I don't know 3/4 of the way through or whatever. I
Hmm.
was like, oh shit, where's this going now? But also, I didn't know that the whole plan from the beginning was going to be deception, total
Yeah.
psyops, whatever.
And Starfleet was on board with that part.
Yeah. I mean, again, when you're looking at the loss of everything, what what wouldn't what would be really that morally
Yeah.
wrong?
Yeah, it's either we're all going to live like Benny Russell, or if we surrender now, or we fight and lose, and that'll be 900 billion dead, and then we all have to live like Benny Russell.
Yeah, yeah, it's nice to tie it together like that. Um, I had no idea, by the way, about the forger guy, little skeevy Grathan. I don't forget how you say his name.
Well, the interesting thing with him is that Garrick probably could have got like a better forger.
Mm.
They could have got like that guy Felix who makes all the holosuite programs for Dr. Bashir, probably. But I think he wanted someone who is expendable. Like, yeah, this guy is kind of a piece of shit. No one's gonna miss him. He's on death row in the Klingon Empire right now before we get Gowron to pardon him. So yeah, I'm probably gonna use him and then murder him and hide the body, and that'll tidy that up, real nice and clean and neat.
Mm-hmm.
He knew the plan with Senator Vreenak because remember when he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna sneak aboard the Romulan shuttle." Which, by the way, I love that Romulan shuttle. It looked, and the way that they sneak it in, cloaked
Oh
and
yeah,
everything.
it was cool. I hadn't.
Cool.
That was like I feel like the best shot I'd ever seen of it. It looked really dope.
Yeah, this is the only time we've seen this particular.
Oh, is it the
ship.
only time? Okay.
Yeah, there was a Romulan scout ship, but it was a little different.
That's what I was thinking of. That's what I was thinking of. Just as a quick aside, the Romulan Senator Vreenak, maybe. I recognize him from horror circles as from being in a sort of cult horror movie called Pontypool, little indie horror movie from I don't know 6 or 7 years ago maybe, and where he really is commanding in it. He's a strong presence. So
yeah, he's a good actor. I think that guy had to quit acting because he got Alzheimer's. I might be confusing him for another Romulan. So if that's the case, then someone please correct me. But yeah, he's definitely like good in this episode. I don't know if I've seen him in anything else, but
if you ever get a chance, Pontypool is one that might be worth your time.
He comes off as like so like arrogant, like all Romulans are at the beginning. But when he's drinking the beverage with Cisco. And he's like, for a second there, I almost thought it was the real thing. But it kind of tells you, okay, this guy has like an eye for detail, right? Like,
yeah.
if he thinks something's a fake, he's gonna tell you,
right?
So that was kind of foreshadowing. But like Garrick had a backup plan for that, and that I guess the cool thing about this episode is like, I do think that Cisco probably crossed the line here, but it's hard to figure out, okay, at what point did he, is it like, oh, I'm going to get like that bio gel from the doctor, even though he's like, please, like, don't be handing this stuff out. Like, is that right, cross the line? Or was it like...
Well, and here's the thing. It's the kind of thing where I would say in many situations that would be crossing the line. Bashir is like, oh, you need me to commit a war crime? Well, I'm going to file a protest. And I was like, oh, how is he going to stop that? And I guess he didn't. I guess he just got Starfleet to buy into it.
Well, Starfleet was already on board the plan at that point.
Yeah. But if the stakes were not so high, I don't think they would have done it. And I think that's that. Is it honorable? Does honor matter at that point? When you're talking survival, when you're talking total fascistic oppression, that's the price that you might hope you would be willing to pay.
But there's something I read one time that has always stuck with me. This is actually like from one of the people in the art team of that other Star franchise who was working on the Phantom Menace, a movie that I'm not a fan of. Sorry, I'm like the old school prequel hater. I think we're a dying breed at this point, but that's okay. I'm glad other people like it. I don't. But one of the things I was reading from this art designer is they were talking about like some of the concept art they came up with for the character Darth Maul in that movie, who has like a pretty extreme look in the the final design. But he said some of the stuff that they came up with in the design phase was even more extreme, where they had he had like feathers stapled to his head, or just like like weird stuff like that to like show how hardcore this guy is. And he said like sometimes when you're doing concept art, you go too far intentionally because then you can, walk it back if you need to.
Right.
And it's something he says, like, you can never find the limit until you finally go past it and go too far. Only then do you truly know how far you can go.
Yeah.
And hearing that, like, I always think of, like, okay, in the Pale Moonlight, it's like a perfect example, and it's kind of my litmus test if there's something going on in Star Trek where I'm like, is this like too sinister for like Starfleet to be doing this? I always compare it to like in the Pale Moonlight, and it's like, well, is it worse than that or is it not? And I think it's good, to have like something like, okay, we've might have crossed the line here, but at least now we kind of have some vague idea where the line might be. So, when I'm watching like Discovery Season 1 and Saru is like torturing a tardigrade to get the spore drive to work, or, Sarek is coming up with a plan to like bomb Kronos. Like I compared that stuff to In the Pale Moonlight and kind of just use that as my litmus test.
Yeah, I like that. That's a pretty good one. Although it's also a little tricky because the circumstances are so unique surrounding it.
Yeah. And
by the way, I just wanted to. Well, were you done, Fatheree, or?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to jump back to early on when he's early on in his misdeeds of the episode when he has to bribe Quark. There is. I wanted to compliment Armin Shimmerman on his. Like, he looks like it's like a thing of beauty watching Sisko's morality collapse.
You've restored my faith in the 98th rule of acquisition. Every man has his price.
Yeah, and like, that's the kind of thing that I think would normally just, you could almost build an episode around him having to have bribed Quark for whatever reason, and it would have just burned in him. But like, at that point, he had already mentally made the jump, and it was a little galling to have to do it, but it was just something he had to get through and then move on to the next thing. And I thought both those actors were playing it really brilliantly.
Yeah, Avery Brooks can't get enough credit for this episode because even there, like he seems like it's crushing his soul so much. Like he does seem ashamed when he's like,
sure.
Okay, is that enough? Is that enough of a bribe, Quark? Is there anything else that you need from me?
Yeah.
And then at the end, well, I guess like that whole process, all of the. They're not the flashbacks. I guess like the framing device. I guess that's the present. Everything else is the past. But the scenes of him talking to the computer, he has so much conviction in the way he's like delivering those lines. He convinces the audience. Like he when he's like, I had to keep my eye on the ball. And he keeps like quoting his dad and all that stuff. Like it's like, man, like you really believe that this guy was between this rock and this hard place and had to make like these tough calls and was so like determined. And he's tired of seeing like these lists of names of dead people, and it's like, yeah, like who wouldn't feel pushed into doing something big in that situation.
There's a quality of a Shakespearean monologue to that sequence, like a soliloquy, and those are hard to do if you're not an amazingly talented actor. Talented actors can make it happen because the key to them all is always to make it feel spontaneous, to take the listener on like a journey where there's highs and there's lows, and Avery Brooks is absolutely a guy who can do that, where you can feel like you're falling down with him. You can feel that surge of anger he would in like that moment you're talking about. So yeah, I think when we talk about the craft, it's like, well, the skeletal, the structure of the episode is like a Shakespearean soliloquy. There's there's clever, not obtrusive use of symbolism, like him taking the uniform off. It's legit. I was a little worried about this one, to be honest, and it was one that for me fully came through as like absolute peak Trek.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed it as much as most of us seem to. I just thought it was just gonna be another episode of DS9 the first time I saw it in '98, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that was really good." But I didn't.
I can't
I
even
had no
imagine.
idea it was gonna be this iconic thing for decades that people still talk about.
Yeah, I almost can't even imagine it in the era.
And it is a big win for the Federation. At the end, Sisko has taken a personal loss, but it's a huge moment for the war, for the show. This huge turning, like the Romulans not only declare war, but they destroy 15 bases on the border. So it's basically like when the Romulans go to war, they go to fucking war. It's like, okay, we're gonna do 15 Pearl Harbors on the Dominion on day one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, it's Garrick, man. bro.
Yeah. And all it cost was the life of one Romulan senator. Okay, they're all shitheads. One
Yeah.
scumbag criminal, they all suck. And the self-respect of one Starfleet officer. If you ask me, I'd call that a bargain too, Garrick.
What a great little scene that is, though.
Yeah, that tailor shop scene, just the way that like Cisco, I guess it is like a little cartoony, the way that Cisco like backhands him and Garrick just flies across the room. But the acting is just so damn good in that.
You know what I think that why I think that works is because it is Trek, and like now we've had decades to kind of weigh on this. But the very first time it happens, I think like there's probably people who still haven't fully forgiven Deep Space Nine for taking Trek there, and that you had to kind of, I think, on some level show the visceral reaction some people were going to have, and that even a person who had gone on the journey with Deep Space Nine and was like, Cisco, you and Garrick ended up doing the right thing. That there'd be this just emotional, this isn't what we do, moment to it. But yes, it is. It is. Trek sometimes Trek's melodramatic.
But yeah, I mean, this is another one that we could probably talk about all night. But I think I said like the key things for me, like the big things on it. Dave, I don't know if you have anything else before you'll be ready to move on to the next episode, His Way. But
I think I'm just skimming through my notes, and there's not anything super key that we need to mention. But I did want to mention I loved the mock debate between Cisco and Dax as they're trying to determine like, how will we convince the Romulans it's in their best interest to join the war?
Yeah, they'll want proof of Dominion duplicity.
Yeah, it takes the it's a good. It felt real. A mock debate seemed like a smart idea. It's too big to not kind of have prepared for at that level. And it also showed how hard it was going to be. Like, without us having to actually see it all, it gave us a sense of like, they know just what hard asses the Romulans are going to be, that it's going to be almost impossible to convince.
Yeah. Speaking of Dax, that planet that Vreenak had met with the Dominion on, Sukara, that's the planet that her and Worf were on, where they're supposed to go extract that Cardassian that we talked about last week in Change of Heart.
Oh, yeah.
So good use of continuity there.
Yeah, that's neat.
I guess my only complaint, with the Beta Z thing is that we never learned the story of like what exactly happens on Beta Z, or like when it gets liberated, or what the deal is there. And I was like, man, like they could have done one final Loxana Troy story in DS9, and with something with her during the war, and with the Dominion occupation of her planet. But we never see that story. They made a novel about it, so maybe I'll read that someday.
Oh, that's cool. I think that's a neat idea for a novel, and I would have liked to have seen that too.
The cover on the novel, if I remember correctly, it's like Deanna Troi holding a phaser rifle in front of a bunch of Jem'Hadar.
That sounds all right. That sounds cool.
Let's move on to Season 6, Episode 20, His Way, written by Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler, directed by Alan Craker. I got Alan Craker's name wrong last week. I called him Croker. It's weird because it's spelled like Kroeker. I always forget, like, is it the O that's silent or is it the E? But Alan Craker, I believe I'm getting it right now.
All right.
But this one, Odo consults a holographic lounge singer about his relationship with Kira. So, Dave, this is the first time you met Vic Fontaine.
Correct.
He becomes a huge recurring character in DS9. Even this late, we're getting extremely close to the end of the show.
Yeah.
And even this late, they're introducing even more recurring characters, as if they didn't have enough.
And there's still some episodes that are also just sort of standalone bottle episodes, episode of the, Alien Planet of the Week kind of stuff. So here's what I didn't know anything about Vic Fontaine other than that I would hear the name mentioned, and I have a light antipathy for some of the period piece Trek episodes, whether it's Picard the Detective or some of the other ones. Like sometimes I find it was just one of those slightly annoying things to me about that all the holodeck guys all happen to idolize like the 40s and 50s, just like I'm imagining a lot of Trek writers did. That was kind of their notion of cool was galvanized by Bogart, right? And or sometimes classic literature stuff, but
or Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack if you're Ira Steven Behr, apparently.
And so I kind of expected Vic Fontaine to be lame. I really did, and there is a part of me that finds it some of the stuff in this episode a little skeevy and manipulative, though not in a way that was inappropriate in the 90s. It was just kind of how things were. But his exact the delivery, the Rat Pack vibe to him, calling everybody pally and all that stuff, did win me over. It won me over.
I was James Darren in real life. The actor that they have, he does all like the singing himself, and apparently he's like that. In real life.
Actually like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I think there's like some old like crooner. Is it Bobby Darin? I thought it was maybe related to him when I saw the name. I don't think he is. I think he's just comes from like an acting and singing background, and so that was. Like,
but he knew those guys. He knew like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and stuff. He had like hung out with them in Vegas in the old days.
So yeah, he had the real spirit of it. It's a fun idea. He's also I realized, or I sort of was, if I were to guess what was going on behind the scenes, and I don't know enough to guess to know if this.
I can tell you exactly what was going on.
Okay.
What was your guess?
Well, I felt like this and like later episodes where the stuff like this will come up. The episode "Sound of Her Voice." I felt like this was a response to Counselor Troy, that they wanted to. That they wanted to show that you could do something a little more interesting with the idea, that it wouldn't have to be kind of that sort of touchy-feely, almost the 80s cliche of touchy-feely that Troy sometimes seemed to represent.
Right. Yeah, it's very 80s to put a therapist on the bridge right next to the captain.
Right. And they're like, hey, we can deliver this with some style. We can do this, we can have it where he's all but like,
he's
like
DS9's Guinan.
He's like, I'm going to get you laid, pally.
He doesn't say that, but it's essentially.
He doesn't, but like, there's the other side of the 80s was those movies I'd see, like the John Hughes movies where like Kelly LeBrock and Weird Science, or half the movies he's in are about like getting the nerdy kid laid. And again, in the same way that some of those have aged a little bit awkwardly, or a lot awkwardly here and there, there's probably a little bit of the manipulation going on with Kira and Odo in here. As some of it, I can't approve of all of it.
You're talking about you don't like that when Vic lies to them to get them on their first date.
Some of that stuff, yeah.
Because he basically I guess he never lies to Kira, but he lies to Odo and says like, "Oh, I fixed the Kira hologram. I made her even more realistic." But it is a romantic comedy, at heart.
Sure.
It's an episode Ira Steven Behr is extremely proud of. Some people, they don't like the Kira Odo romance. And I want to get your thought on that in just a second. But, for me, I think that just knowing, where this relationship goes, I think it's, much like you didn't really like the Cassidy Yates, Ben Sisko stuff initially, or, the Jadzia and Worf stuff initially. It actually does, get better after they kickstart the relationship, but the cool thing about this episode in particular to me is just we get to have Nana visitors do the number where she's singing Fever, which even when I was a kid, I first heard that song on the Muppets, actually, someone the old 70s Muppet show, someone sang it on there, and I just happened to I saw that later in the 80s when I was real little, but it just always kind of imprinted on me. I just always thought it was a super sexy song, but yeah, it's some people call this episode it's almost like a Star Trek musical, and I don't think it's, if look up the definition of a musical, it doesn't pass, but I think it is a lot of fun. But
that song must have been in the ether, Fatheree, because it was also in an episode of Married with Children. Kelly Bundy sings it at a talent show, and she does a super sultry version of it, and it has everybody in the audience, all the parents start making out with each other by the end. So that's the gag. Yeah, it's there's a lot of creepy stuff on Married with Children. Anyway, yes, so yeah, I can absolutely enjoy these kind of episodes where you just get to see the cast do the fun stuff. It's what holodeck episodes are. It's one of the reasons you go to them. So you get the actors to show off their other talents. You get to get them in costumes they wouldn't. Odo gets to look dope as hell. He's all suave. And you get to see him get some confidence in it.
Yeah.
I also kind of like stories where the nerdy guy or the awkward girl or whoever gets pushed outside of their boundaries a little bit, and it ends up working out for them.
Well, it's a good like moral to this episode
Sure.
in that like I kind of don't like the term like reinvent yourself because it's like, well, you're still you. Like it does, I don't know.
Right.
Reinvent almost sounds like you're gonna like lie about who you are or something.
Right.
But
Occasionally, like when he was telling, he's like, "You're a cold fish, Odo. You gotta like, show him some moves." And I was like, well, at a certain point, he would cease to be Odo if he didn't have that. It's almost more like, and maybe they didn't quite say it the way I wanted to, but it's more like you just need him to be able to loosen up and express things he's always wanted to, perhaps, but
Right.
hasn't been able to. But like when you see him playing the piano and having so much fun, like you can see he's enjoying it, right? It's not him becoming a different person. It's him being able to express happiness and live a little bit of joie de vivre, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that I respect this episode for that I think is also kind of a cool message is that it's not so much like he's like the lonely guy, but it's like the woman's fault for like not seeing like the cool side. It's like no, like you're going about this the wrong way, Odo. It's like it's something that you can fix yourself, but you kind of have to assess yourself and like make some changes to yourself
Right, and that
and
is
do some
actually
work there.
that is probably the most important and good lesson I think of it is that
Yes.
working on oneself is kind of a part of it. No one deserves that sex in cells. Deserves you deserve to be treated like a human being, but that's the rest you have to somewhat earn. And what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I was looking at my notes and I saw that Quark was referring to Odo in business terms. His pursuit of Kira, he's like called it an attempted merger or
Oh,
something.
I do love like Odo doesn't have like a friend he can like talk about like his crush with, but he has
Yeah.
like his rival Quark, like the one person who like knows and respects them enough that they could have like this heart talk. And we've seen them do this type of stuff before,
Right.
but yeah, I liked that scene. And the cool thing is like this was right after they started doing Star Trek: The Experience in Las Vegas, where they had like a real life Quark's bar you could go to and order drinks. And the warp core, this episode had the warp core breach in it, right? That he whips up.
Yeah, yeah.
That was in this one. That was a drink from the experience from the bar. So it
Oh,
wasn't
nice.
when they started selling that drink. It wasn't canon initially, but then after this aired, then it became like a canonical beverage from the Star Trek universe.
I see in our comments that Jill said she's never liked the Odo Kira relationship, and you mentioned to me that like I might need to grow on it, and I thought about that even as I was watching it, and I've even in just the next 7 episodes or 6 episodes, I was able to see it sort of grow and see the actors fall into it. I'm still making up my mind a little bit about it. It still seems a little. In particular, he feels like he's infatuated with her, but I feel like maybe wouldn't know, especially since that's kind of his first serious relationship, if not his first sex, but
Yeah,
first serious relationship.
he had a one night stand in season 5.
Right. And lots of stuff with the female changeling.
Oh yeah.
But like I wouldn't necessarily expect them to fit, just they just might not click. And he does not seem like someone who is that up her alley. I don't see it. But can you convince me of it? Probably so. I'm willing to go along with it, and I think they did some good stuff in the next few episodes where you get to see them banter, be kind of cute with each other, and you get to see him both be Odo and let his hair down a little bit, metaphorically.
Yeah, she brings out a more fun side of him that we didn't see in the first 6 seasons of the show, but we'll explore more of in the 7th season.
The only scene in this one that like I realized that I made a note of it. I think this is the one that I thought aged poorly, aside from maybe a little bit of the setup stuff by Vic, is when Vic's talking to Kira and he says neither of us will take no for an answer, and she's like, "Well, I guess I better go along or whatever," and I'm like, "Fuck that."
No means no.
Yeah, don't
90s
be
television
pressuring
writers.
someone who's telling you no. because it was coupled. I know it's of the era, right? As surely as a lot of the sexist stuff in the '60s is of its era. We weren't that much more evolved yet in the '90s. We're getting there. We're working on it. But because they were also doing the story where Odo was working on himself, so that it wasn't just like I deserve her love, period. I feel like I'm going to give him at least something of a pass on it. That was not the whole message. Was like, hey, just notice the awkward guy, hot chick. It was not that story.
Well, let's move on to Season 6, Episode 21, The Reckoning. Teleplay by David Weddle and Bradley Thompson. Story by Harry Worksman and Gabriel G. Stanton. Directed by Jesus Salvador Trevino. The discovery of a 30,000-year-old Bajoran tablet buried under the holy city of Bahala announces the reckoning, the time when the future of Bajor will be decided. So this kind of follows up the episode Rapture in Season 5, where Sisko discovered the whereabouts of this city Bahala, kind of like their, Atlantis or something.
Yeah.
It also, follows up on what we saw in Sacrifice of Angels, where the prophets tell Sisko he must pay a penance. Dave, what did you think of the reckoning?
I had slightly mixed feelings on the episode. There was I thought the idea of looking at Sisko's sort of ever-changing faith was a good idea. I can't remember if this is the episode or if it's another where he said, oh, I think this is the one, right? Where he's like calling them the prophets, and Dax is like, you used to call them the wormhole aliens.
Yes.
And he says, he's like, when you've had enough experiences with them, you start taking them as the prophets.
Which I feel like we had already kind of crossed that bridge in Season
Probably
5, so it felt a little redundant.
Probably so. But I also... Something about it didn't feel like it quite came together for me. I liked having Kai Wynn show up again. She's at an interesting place where she's not an overt villain, but she's still she actually almost has two sort of things going on: her usual self-interest, and then this desire, this absolute utter envy of the emissary to be who he is. But yeah, it got weird at the end. So I suddenly there was like two people that were avatars of the gods and like a demon shooting beams that met in the middle, which is a trope I don't like.
It's like a Dragon Ball Z thing where two characters shoot energy beams at each other.
It also has happened in a million comics. Cyclops hitting a blast with some other bad guy, Magneto's energy, and like X-Men. Very, very tropey. It's usually it's meant to indicate two equally matched opponents, right? And so I definitely did get that out of it. But it sort of went wild at the end, and I was fascinated by a real like Pa-Wraith demon kind of thing showing up. And I liked the story element of Kai Wynn's compromising it all. I wasn't sure if I was. I still have to think about it, I suppose. If I like, I think that it's the biblical story of Abraham where he's going to sacrifice his son.
Yeah, which I think that story from the Bible or Torah is terrible because
it's a terrible story.
You shouldn't worship a god that would ask. I know, like God, like at the last minute, he's like, "Oh, just kidding, Abraham. I just wanted to make sure you would do it." But like that's not really like an honorable trait in a deity to worship. I think like you need to love me enough that you'll kill your kids for me.
Yeah.
But
so I wasn't sure how I felt about Sisko. I feel the same about Sisko being in that place.
I think the reason why it works here, or at least it works for me, is that like the prophets aren't asking Sisko to kill Jake. They're just he's basically of the opinion like no, like they're not going to harm him. They'll keep him safe.
Right.
Which is actually quite different. But thematically, it does show like, he has that conviction. I think that was the point of the episode is they wanted like everyone else on the station, even Dax, who's normally like really open-minded with the weird wormhole alien stuff. Everyone else is like freaked out and scared, even Kai Wynn. But Sisko is like the one person on the station, and I think that is like kind of cool that like.
And I do think they accomplished that, and I think that I don't know how this whole show ends, but
this is big stuff for the.
But I do feel like
Season 7,
like it's setting up like end game stuff, and it absolutely did accomplish the making me see Cisco that way. I continue to like think of myself as like if I were Dax or if I were Starfleet, those Starfleet officers that he works with, I too would be nervous about his allegiances and and everything. But it's it's still like it was an interesting episode. Just it's probably not going to go down as a particular favorite of mine.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And as much as I love season 6, I will admit that there are a few episodes and here towards the end of season 6, and then even a little bit at the beginning of season 7, where I think the show had just it just had been increasing in terms of quality year after year, every year for 6 years, and then when they kind of had to set things up for the big ending we're eventually going to get, and there is like a little bit of I think things get like a little rocky, get like a little clumsy.
Yeah.
We're in the batch of episodes where there is a bit of that, but things get back on track very quickly in early season 7, and then I think the show maintains its what we can expect is the quality of DS9 all throughout the larger part of season 7. But yeah, I think this episode, it does feel like a little like kind of like thrown together at the last minute, but it is setting up big stuff. The Costamogen, I'm never sure if that's like the name of a particular paw wraith or is that like a group of paw wraith, because sometimes they'll say Costamogen and it's like plural, but here it's like this paw wraith is named Costamogen is kind of how it appears.
Oh yeah, I think I took it to be like a singular one, but
Yeah.
but I've only seen the episode once. If yeah, I believe you that it's used plural.
It's used again in future episodes too.
Sure.
But I just love like, okay, the prophet, like their mentality is like, okay, who on the station likes me and would be a willing vessel for me and has a strong heart and would be willing to do this. Oh, okay, this person, Kira Nerys, I'm going to inhabit her body for the big battle. And then the Paw Wraith is like, okay, who on the station would it fuck with the emissary the most? He has a kid? Okay, that's who I'm going to possess.
That's good demon tactics. That's just
Yeah.
straight good demon tactics. By the way, the stuff. Speaking of Cyril Lofton, there's a good scene earlier on in the episode where
When he's
he and
worried
Avery-
about his dad.
Yeah, where they talk
Yeah.
about kind of the things that they've gone through, and sort of the several times when he's like, yeah, I thought you were going to die, Dad, because of these events related to this. And those two actors, they do so good together. It's one of the great pleasures of Deep Space Nine for me. The very best of the best things. Sometimes it's Kira, sometimes it's Garrick, and sometimes it's Cisco and his kid. A lot of times they're at the heart of what I like best about the whole show. And so they can make a scene like that sing even an episode where I'm kind of a little lukewarm on it.
Well, you know what, Dave? Something for you to look forward to whenever we're done with DS9 and you can watch the What We Left Behind documentary.
Yeah, I keep seeing it referenced, and I always avoid looking at what people are saying about it.
Well, the cool thing about it is that when they were shooting this episode, the big battle between Kira and Jake, the actors had an incredibly hard time not bursting into laughter constantly, just having to pretend to shoot energy beams at each other.
Yeah.
And there's actually a clip of I guess it's after like the Paw Wraith has like left Jake's body. It's like Avery Brooks is like laying on the floor next to Sirach Lofton, and like just Sirach cannot stop laughing. And Avery is like trying not to laugh himself. He's like, "Come on, man, get it together." And there's you just see like this warmth and like this bond between the two actors, and it's really touching.
That's great.
I'm glad they included that kind of behind the scenes clip in that documentary, because it was the first I'd ever seen it. But yeah, it was really cool.
That's great.
But yeah, Kai Wynn, she pulls the plug on the big battle, and that will have huge ramifications. This is supposed to be the be all end all of the Prophets versus the Paw Wraith, and because it didn't play out, that will come back to we'll even hear there's some Paw Wraith versus Prophet stuff at the end of this season that we'll get to
Correct.
in just a moment. Before we get there, however, we got to talk about those kids on the Valiant in the episode Valiant. So this is season 6, episode 22, written by Ronald D. Moore, directed by Michael Vijar. Fleeing a Jem'Hadar attack aboard a runabout, Jake and Nog are rescued by a Defiant-class ship crewed by overeager Red Squad cadets who are biting off more than they can chew. Dave, real quick before we get into like the cadet story, I just want to briefly mention, that opening scene of no, I think it was here when Quark was trying to mix the warp. No, he's making something else. He's making a different drink. But when Odo is seeing Quark struggle without his drink replicator, and then Jadzia comes to repair it, and he's like, "Oh my God, her beautiful hands shouldn't be cleaning or repairing my dirty ass drink replicator." And Odo's like, "Oh, you're in love." So this is they hinted at this during the Tongo game with Dr. Bashir, but yeah, Quark apparently has these strong romantic feelings for Jadzia. So what do you think of that reveal?
I kind of like it. I feel like it fits sort of what's been going on, and Quark kind of recognizing that his own skeeviness, like the way he often approaches things, that acquisitional way, wouldn't work on her. But he admires her, and he loves that this does fit, that she hangs out with the Ferengi and she plays games with them, and she really loves it. And so there must be some part of her that is like, this is the coolest chick I've ever seen in my life. And he's like, and she's too good for me. and I don't know if they do anything with it really, or if that's just kind of a little bit of flavor.
You don't know if like Quark and Jadzia are gonna like ride off into the sunset together.
Yeah, I'm gonna assume that doesn't happen, yeah. But there's a few episodes down the way. There's a scene where was it right before some bad stuff happens? I think is it Quark and no, it's Bashir and Quark saying, "Oh, it looks like they're talking about having kids, Dax and Worf. Looks like they're going to last longer than we thought." And so it's like, oh, they've conspired a little behind their back. They're like, I give it 6 months or whatever. I think Quark probably actually overtly said something like that. But you can kind of see where it comes from. And so, but anyway, I feel like they've set up enough of that I think it works.
Well, and we'll talk more about that stuff in a moment, but switching gears to Jake and Nog and the cadets. I've never seen the movie Taps with Tom Cruise.
Me neither.
But everything I know about, I assume Ron Moore really likes that movie. I know he did like ROTC stuff when he was in high school, and he was like a big military nerd growing up. So yeah, this is people have always talked about what if they made like a Starfleet Academy show about like cadets, and I think that's unnecessary in 2023. I think Star Trek Prodigy should scratch that itch for the Star Trek audience right now.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like it could be done. I feel like it could be done and feel unique enough, that school environment.
Well, I think it could be done, but I just feel like that's kind of like the point of Prodigy. But here was like an example of like what it could have looked like, I suppose, with the Red Squad kids. But what do you think of
the other project, like inspiration that I thought of as I was watching this, and it's a little looser probably than Taps is. Again, I haven't seen that. Was actually Starship Troopers. Just the gung ho pretty kids who all seemed like still like a little bit too young in the movie, getting chewed up, right?
That
just
came out
chewed up by the
this
military
time.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no idea if that was any influence on it too. And I also thought of the movie A Few Good Men, which kind of puts front and center the debate of well, that's more of a freedom versus security kind of thing. But are like what are we willing to overlook kind of thing. But these kids had something of the zeal of Jack Nicholson's character in that. I couldn't believe I was watching an episode where they're like a Trek captain was popping pills. That was something.
He's not a real captain though. He's just like a cadet.
Yeah, for sure.
Who shouldn't have been left in charge. Ron Moore actually does a good job with the script of like showing you throughout the episode, if you're eagle-eyed enough, that they are pretty amateurish. Like the right at the very beginning with they're trying to drive away that Jem'Hadar attack fighter that is chasing the runabout. It takes them like I think 4 passes. We've seen like the Defiant just shred those things up. It's like,
right.
Oh yeah, these
On
kids on the
pass.
Valiant, they're not. Like they can't even like get like their warp drive working that way. They can only go warp 3, I think, until. Sure.
But they're the best of the best, but they're still best of the best cadets.
Yeah, they're like the best of the best of like the 19 and 20-year-olds.
Where else, by the way, have we heard of Red Squad? Like, what other episodes of
That was
Trek?
in season 4, that two-parter with Admiral Layton, right? Who tries to pull off that coup.
Yeah.
He used the Red Squad cadets to go on
Right.
to that communication station and cause the communication blackout.
Is that the first time they were mentioned?
Yeah, that is
They,
but
they didn't
Nog
go
was
back to
like a
like
big
Wesley
fan of him.
Crusher.
No, that was another Ron Moore written episode. But in the first Duty and Next Generation, that was Nova Squadron. They were just like pilots. They weren't like
Yeah.
this. They weren't like this elite class of like the best students or whatever Red
Right on.
Squad's supposed to be. But Nog was a big fan of them back then in season 4. He's like, oh yeah, these guys are so cool. So it is a bit weird that like Nog, you're like you're an actual like commissioned ensign. You're an officer. Everyone on this ship should be like saluting you and calling you sir. But just he always wanted to play for the varsity team, and here's his chance, I guess.
Right. And he knows that they've been in the thick of it, right? And not as if he hasn't at this point. He has absolutely been in the thick of it. But I think he's like, oh, they've been in the thick of it with limited resources, and yeah, it was a place it was the team I wanted to be on. I think this is a pretty solid episode to see Nog sort of hit that sort of cost of war up close and personal. But also a good one for Jake.
Yeah.
To test his own the sort of the wisdom he's taken from his dad, and and whether he has the courage to speak his convictions, which he's been doing as a reporter, but also he is right from the beginning of being a reporter, he would get in over his head, he would be a little too brash about it. He pissed off Kira and Odo, and and here he instantly gets thrown in the brig, basically.
Yeah, but he does he does have that confidence. He's like found his voice as a writer, and I do like the conflict between him and Nog when what does he tell Nog? I'll have them put that on your tombstone.
Yeah.
And the stuff at the very beginning with Ron Moore shows us that Tim Waters, the captain, shows him that this guy's kind of a prick, because right at the very beginning he's like, oh, you're Benjamin Sisko's son, instead of like Captain Sisko. He talks about like Sisko as if he's like an equal to Sisko.
Right.
And then he's like, I see you're not following in his footsteps. So it's like, okay, I'm as good as your dad, and shame on you for being a lame ass civilian when you could be in Starfleet, like me and your cool pops.
And yet, on a level, like, the empathic side of me is like, well, they had to be in that place mentally to be doing what they've been doing, right? They had to kind of probably hype themselves up a little bit because they're in the scariest place they could ever be.
Yeah,
what was the deal? They were out there when the war broke out, right? They got stuck behind enemy lines, and they've been fighting it out and surviving that whole time. So part of them probably does think we are some pretty serious badasses. We learned all this. We did all this on the job training. We were already good, and now we're great. And yeah, but there is that sort of desperate side of them where a few of them are about to break.
Yeah, Dorian Collins, the girl that I love when she's talking to Jake about like the lunar sunrise, how it only comes like once a month and everything. Like that felt like so real and like something that would happen if people lived on the moon, But when you see her, start to cry and break down and stuff, and then Jake gets chewed out by the asshole first officer,
right? And they bust her too. They're like, is it the captain where he's like, have you been crying?
Yeah. Yeah, and like any, captain we've ever seen in Starfleet, they'd all be like, like, what's wrong? You need to go talk to the counselor. Like, you need some time off or whatever. And he's just like, get your shit together. Like, even, I don't know, even like a real hard ass, even like Jellicoe would have still been like, I would have still cut her some slack.
Yeah, Jellicoe might be like, he's like, I'll take what time you need and then get back in the game or whatever. But yeah.
But it's weird to me that this episode came out 11 years before Star Trek 2009. And I say this as someone who has always enjoyed Star Trek 2009. But this movie almost seems like kind of a response to it. Because it's like, oh, you're going to take like some cocky cadet and put him in command of a ship with a bunch of other inexperienced amateurs? It would end in fucking disaster like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess, if
I kind of like that. It was a prescient reactive episode.
Well, Cadet Tim Waters ain't no Chris Pine.
That's true.
He tried. in Feld, and that at the end, when Nog realized how foolish they were, but Dorian Collins, she's like still like a true believer. She's still
Yeah,
brainwashed.
sure. Makes sense. You don't get over that overnight.
Yeah.
Um, I happened to look a little bit at this on the Memory Alpha and saw that there's one of those anthologies they did where I think they kind of let maybe some amateur authors take their shot. That somebody followed up
Oh,
on her.
probably like the Strange New Worlds anthology
That
they used
that's
to do.
that's it.
Yeah.
They followed up on her story and had like her, I think, kind of decompressing with like sessions with Troy, and I know there was some other stuff I didn't read. I only ever really skim Memory Alpha these days because I don't want to accidentally learn anything as we're in end game here. But yeah, I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind revisiting that character. I always like the idea of revisiting Trek stuff, and Deep Space Nine has come closest to fulfilling what I want, where they'll periodically revisit somebody. Certainly like who was that? Who was the guy who was the oh my god, the gorillas, the anti-Dominion, not Dominion, anti-Cardassian gorillas. What do you call those guys?
The Resistance.
No, no, oh shit. Um, they hide out in the
Shakar.
Badlands.
The
The,
Oh,
what's
the
the
Maquis.
The Maquis. Yeah, I just couldn't say the name Maquis. That guy, the dude who showed up in several episodes and ultimately met his end, the
Yeah,
Maquis
Eddington.
leader, Eddington. And that's a good example. Like that's always the sort of stuff I wanted to see, which was you could have a character who doesn't have to be a major character, you can be a minor character, still get an arc, revisit him on occasion. I don't want that for every single character, but yeah, if every once in a while there's a story to tell with bringing back one of these guys, that'd be dope. Arguably, they did it in as recently as in Picard when they had some of those characters from Voyager crossover. Not
Yeah.
always
Well,
in ways I like,
we're,
but
we're gonna have we're gonna have Moriarty show up in Picard season 3,
yeah,
so it's a lot of. In fact, I'm almost worried that there's gonna be too many callbacks to
right,
pasts. It
right.
might be too little kind of
It's a
fanish.
it's a risk. All right, Fatheree, let's get to it. Let's talk about this next one.
Okay, so everyone's favorite episode, season 6, episode 23, Prophet and Lace, written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler, directed by Dr. Bashir himself, Alexander Sadig. I know he's got to be super proud of this one. Grand Nagus Zek is deposed after he begins to promote female rights. Quark changes his sex temporarily to prevent Brunt from becoming the Grand Nagus. This is often cited as the worst episode of DS9. I have a confession to make. I don't hate it. I understand that I have transgender friends that watch Star Trek that have told me that this was a traumatizing experience to watch, and I understand that. I think it is a bad episode, but it's one that like I remember, laughing at a lot of the stuff back in 1998. I guess I was, to me, like back then, stuff like Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire and like A Man in a Dress can be funny and stuff. But yeah, it definitely does not age well at all.
Well,
Dave, what did you think seeing it for the first time in 2023?
I had at least some of that same reaction, like, and this is the cis het perspective, so woohoo. Yeah, I was not liable to be too to find this too off-putting, and yet there was some obvious times when some of their gags were, like this stuff like Rom, isn't that funny that you keep on being able to identify so much as a woman? What could that mean, Rom? Like that stuff was on pretty shaky grounds.
Yeah.
And yet there's some funny bits in there because they can write good Ferengi stuff on this show.
So
That's
some
just
of the
how it
gags
is.
do work. I don't know if I needed to hear acting Grand Nagus 18 times. I think it stopped being funny after the 14th or 15th time. But there's one instance where like they do that joke where someone calls Brunt like the Grand Nagus. It's like, no, acting Grand Nagus, and then it cuts to a commercial break. And then when it comes back from a commercial break, it's like almost immediately they do it again.
Oh yeah, but like here, a random example of a gag I think that worked. This was like right almost out of the gate. when Cisco's like musing over the possible dangers of this, and he's like a
Oh.
Dominion invasion of Ferenginar, and Rom's like, think of the terrible repercussions to the Alpha Quadrant, and Worf's like, I cannot think of any.
Yeah. The only line he has the entire, like, Michael Dorn put on his Klingon forehead and his Starfleet uniform and went and did like that one line, and he's like, okay, I'm off every day until we shoot the next episode because that's all I'm doing for this one.
Oh wow.
So that must have been nice for him.
Sure.
But there was
these kind of like cross-dressing comedies go back to Shakespeare, and I'm sure before Shakespeare. Twelfth Night is one of the big ones where a character thinks someone else is a different sex, and they fall for them. It happened, not it happened one night. Some Like It Hot, famous comedy from the 60s, I think, not 50s, but 60s, by Billy Wilder, that has the guys hiding out from the mob by cross-dressing. Is still a funny movie if you can get past some of the stuff in it. And I always remember there's a scene at the end of it where it's like, oh, one guy gets the girl who's like, I think Marilyn Monroe in that, and the other guy, like, it's like he turns and like he's still with like one of the other dudes who's cross-dressing, and right before they roll to credits, he does this thing where he's like, oh well, and he like shrugs like well, maybe it's not a problem. And, obviously that was supposed to be, a gag, but it also, and when I saw it, and I only saw it maybe like 10 years ago for the first time, I was like, oh, that almost felt forward thinking. Like, it was like this guy who was like, hey, maybe these gender differences aren't so big after all. Maybe we can circumvent them. Anyway.
Well, it's funny you say that because I've heard the writers of this, Ira and Hans, which, shame on them. They should have been able to do better than this. But I know we're kind of in like that rocky part of season 6 and 7 where it's a combination of A, both, we're running out of ideas. We've been writing the show for so many years. And then B, like, where do we need to position things before our ending? But even with that context, I've heard Ira say in recent years that, like, oh, this episode was forward thinking, and our mistake was that, like, we should have played it for drama and not comedy. And I always thought that was like so strange. And then the more I thought about it, just this week, thinking about having to talk about this episode today, I do kind of see, oh yeah, like they are dealing with some heavy stuff, like rights, equality on Ferenginar. And at the beginning, there's like that terrible scene of Quark trying to coerce one of his employees into performing a sexual favor for him.
That was terrible. I was like, is this really happening?
Like, it's not hyperbolic at all to be like, yeah, this is like a Harvey Weinstein move. Like, it's like pretty accurate. Like,
when I was a kid, I knew about like the old 50s cliche where it was meant to be real funny when the boss chased the secretary around the room.
Yeah.
It was
we get that too, but
right, and there was a lot of that, and in the 90s that was still around sometimes like this, where you'd have a lovable sexist, like I think you were maybe meant to imagine that Quark didn't, or at least hope that he didn't really do this, but yeah, it was. You're right. It's like totally vibes Weinstein. This absolutely gross.
I mean, I guess it turns out it technically isn't sexual harassment because it turns out that it wasn't unwanted advances. She was actually.
I mean,
it,
I don't know that doesn't that removes that liability. That's like
technically
saying,
it does. Technically, like the definition of sexual harassment is like it has to be unwanted.
Yeah, well, a larger debate for another time. I don't want to get too sidetracked on that. But I felt like they just had
that hair.
They just had her into it as kind of more of a. It was kind of a gag, right? And then, of course, that Quark, as like now that he had at least seen the light a little bit about what it's like to be a woman, of course, he blows his chance. It's slapstick.
The potential in here for like telling like a good serious story, like it is there. Like not only do you have stuff going on with Ishka and equality on Ferenginar, but yeah, if Quark does like learn what it's like to be I think. Something I've always thought about, I wish that we as human beings could have like more perspectives than like I wish I could make everyone who like lives. I say this as someone who like has lived both in like rural and urban settings. I wish like everyone who like lives in the city would go spend a decade or two living out in the country, and everyone who like lives out in the country would go spend a decade or two like living in the city.
Right. If we had those longer lifespans to maybe be able to sneak more of that in.
Yeah, I well even more so
or
than
just
just
the drive to
lifespan.
do
Like
it.
I wish that like everyone who's a man would like have to live as a woman for a little bit and live as like a
For sure.
non-binary person for a little. Like I wish we could all like have those experiences. But this here was a science fiction way for like Quark to like have that experience. But yeah, they play it just for total like gags and buffoonery, and the actors on set, shooting this and Sadig directing this, they all kind of thought that yeah, this isn't very funny. And as Geek Filter and our audience was pointing out, Armin Shimmerman actually considers this his least favorite episode. And the reason I've heard him give for that is because he feels like Quark doesn't learn anything. And
Right.
so I can agree with Ira Stephen Bear now that yeah, there is potential here if they had done this as like a serious dramatic episode. Uh, and it would have been tricky to pull off though. It would have been like
Right.
a pretty ambitious, hard to do thing. It just
Yeah.
yeah, probably would have been best if they
I
just
think you'd
hadn't
have
made
to.
this.
I think. Well, you know what, Father. The thing that interested me as I was watching this is that I had always. I had read about like it probably Memory Alpha and places like that.
Hmm.
About that there were some reforms to Ferengi society. So I've been watching Moogie and Grand Nagus Zek getting to that place in previous episodes, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm finally getting to see it. And I didn't realize that probably one of the bigger episodes for it would end up being this one. Who knew? But yeah, that actually is like super notable. If the ultra sexist society of the Ferengi actually does kind of get undone, I think if you played it almost a little dark comedy and a little and a fair amount serious drama, but like you have to have some comedy in it, and it has to be a little absurdist. Maybe it could have come off, but yeah, I can't picture what that would look like in my head. So maybe it would be better to not have done the episode.
Yeah. I mean, I can still watch it, and then I laugh at like the Ferengi call center. They said when they're trying to get can we get any of these rich assholes to come hear out Zek. And I just, as someone who's like done like a lot of like call center work in the past, and I've done like fundraising and like political outreach and stuff like that. And yeah, it is, you do hit like a bunch of angry people on the other end of the line, so that's kind of relatable for me. And I think that Nilva is like a good Ferengi. The actor, what's his something Hamilton, right? He's like he did like a lot of like comedic stuff. He's the Nazi dude in Blues Brothers, right? This is the
Oh,
same
okay.
guy. Um, but yeah, I think he's good. I would have liked him coming back. If they needed like the chairman of Sluggo Cola. It is weird. Like he seems to be expecting like a date or something with Lumba. So I don't see how this episode like works. Like how does he not like eventually learn that like, oh, this guy was a man all along? Like I guess Zek was able to take this momentum and use it to maneuver his return to the throne successfully. But yeah, I totally get why people hate it, and I think it is embarrassing in this day and age.
The
Or
thing that
it always was embarrassing, I guess, as
I
some
think
people have pointed out.
where the points where it works is occasionally in the incidental writing of stuff that's funny. Not all of usually which is actually isn't necessarily related to sort of gender role jokes. Like
Hmm.
there's a bit early on where Lita is meet and what like Rom are meeting Zek, and like Zek is Grand Nega Zek is being a little bit trashy about it and ogling her, and Ishka's like it's like remember that's Rom's wife, and he's like meaning what, and he's like meaning she's broke.
Yeah.
That's a solid Ferengi joke.
Um, I hated when like Quark was like all womanly though, and he's like, "Oh, these facts and figures are too much for me to keep up with." That's cringe. It's like, yeah, because
Yeah.
women are so dumb,
And
they
there was
can't do
also like
math.
they did that, and they did hormone, jokes and stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of embarrassing, cringy things here. But one joke I did laugh at is when they're like, "Why don't we just make Rom the woman?" And Zach is like, "No, like we need Quark and his business know how and every." And then when Quark says, your stupidity has saved you once again. Uh, and then Rom's response, it comes in handy sometimes. Well, it's funny, Dave. I was watching that with my friend Elmore, and he's
Mhm.
like, "Yeah, that's true." Like that was his reaction to that. Um, but the other funny thing, well, I already talked about that, like the call center stuff. I don't know, the Sluggo Cola joke, they kind of run that into the ground. It kind of stops being funny. The slimiest cola in the world, or whatever, like the little jingle that they put like
Yeah.
10 seconds of thought into coming up with. Uh, yeah, it's not great. We last week we talked about the Magnificent Ferengi, so that's probably the best Ferengi episode in my opinion. So I guess it's fair to dub this one the worst.
I've still got at least another season to watch here before I can
Yeah.
decide. We'll see.
Oh, well, speaking of that, I guess my closing thought on this episode will be like we're getting close to the ending of DS9, and they're setting things up for the ending. As I keep pointing out, Ira Stephen Bear made it a top priority in the writers' room. He. He's always felt like, yeah, they hate us. They hate Deep Space Nine. No one cares about us. They only care about the original and TNG and Voyager. We're never going to get any love. We're never going to get any respect. They're not going to bring us back to do a movie, or whatever we do in the seventh season is going to be it. And so we need to make sure that everything has like a good ending. And so they are planning an end for their Ferenginar story arc,
Oh,
and this does get us on the road
interesting.
towards that.
Okay, cool.
So, but yeah, if you're ready, we can go ahead and move on
To
to
an O'Brien Must Suffer episode.
yes, which I probably think of this as my least favorite O'Brien Must Suffer episode. I don't like this one. But this is season 6, episode 24, Time's Orphan, teleplay by Bradley Thompson and David Weddle, story by Joe Manosky, directed by Alan Craker. An accident on the planet Galana sends Molly O'Brien through a time portal 300 years into the past into an uninhabited world. Beamed back too late, Molly returns to the present 18 years old with no immediate recollection of her life or her family. Dave, what do you think?
So here's the funny thing. I was watching the episode and I thought the basic premise and even a lot of the sort of turns in it were kind of half baked sci-fi. I didn't think they were great. I was surprisingly emotional at the end of it when they're actually saying goodbye. And I don't know if it's just because I've had a kind of an intense week or what, but it like I was very in the moment when they're saying goodbye and all of that
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and I was like excited that Worf had made a connection with a little baby going gung gung gung.
I love the B story. Love the B story.
But yeah, when I was first watching it, I thought it was like, oh, is this going to be like a baby Jessica story with the kid who fell in the well, and that they're going to spend the whole episode trying to get her out, and then they do that very quickly, and I was like, oh, I see. This is more like there's an X-Men story where Colossus's little sister got stuck in a dimension, and she got time zapped like this and came back like 10 years older. Only ultimately in X-Men, all they did was use that as an excuse to make her hot, which was a
Yes.
little bit
I was about to say that.
kind of a little weird, honestly. But
Well,
anyway, they
comic
did at
comic
least
book artists, they like to draw the sexy ladies.
they do. It's a thing. Anyway, I can at least say that they didn't do that going in this route, but and I appreciate a story that like at least some of the concepts where I feel like this was somewhat when it had like some stronger moments. It felt like it was there's no one size fits all for a kid who's in some way special needs, right? You can't just
Mm.
try and do this. Sometimes you got to do something unique. Their solution of sending her potentially back to live in total isolation
That's
for the
that's the
rest of
deal
her
breaker
life.
for me. That's
Th-
why I don't like this one. I don't buy that.
So it's only because the episode O'Brien told me that it was better, that it would be the best way for her, that I'm like, okay, I guess if he's thought it through, even though it seems terrible, I know it's intended to not be, kind of by the writers. But yeah, I was like, that's just nuts. Like she could get like a tooth infection and die, but
Right?
but um I liked seeing, I liked the drive of the parents. I liked that they're willing to break the law for their kid. I like that Odo let them go. There's elements about it. It's just that the
Yeah.
execution, and especially that ending, man, somebody needed to take another pass at that. And if they were going to send her back there, then we needed to find out that, oh yeah, food was plentiful then. Oh, there was, there are animals that were, almost sentient that she had bonded with. And, like, I
Mhm.
needed to really know that she was going back to a thing that would have been okay.
Well, and I agree with a lot of the good things that you pointed out. And I even though I said that I don't like this episode, there's
Mm.
a lot of stuff in here that I do like, and it reminds me one last thing about that last episode, Prophet and Lace. That so I asked people in our Discord server. By the way, check out the description wherever you're watching or listening to this. There's a link to the Discord server, and you can be part of like these cool conversations we have all the time over there. But believe it was Jay in the Discord server. I was asking, is there anything people like in Prophet and Lace? And Jay said, one cool thing is that it shows how easy and seamless it is for I believe the correct, we don't say sex change anymore. The correct term is gender affirmation surgery, right?
I think that's right.
But how easy like those procedures for like your trans people or your non-binary people,
Yeah.
people who are seeking that, which is kind of a vital thing, that a lot of people really struggle with, trying to get this day and age, and is detrimental to people's mental health when they're unable to fulfill those urges to have those procedures done. And it is a beautiful thing to think, like look how much of a non-issue that is.
Right.
Just go to
You just
Dr. Bashir's infirmary and get that done in an afternoon, and no one seems to care. So
Yep.
that's cool. Uh,
Yeah. Like we can recognize that probably they weren't necessarily thinking of it like in a deep way when they came to that.
right.
Probably not the way we would think of it now. But I love when you can find those things in Trek, same as you can, when the with the Klingons' acceptance of Dax in
Mm-hmm.
that episode. I'm like, that's
Curzon, my old friend. I go by Jadzia now. Jadzia, my old friend.
yeah, it's like you couldn't ask for a better sequence, even though yes, we know it was not on their mind in the way it is now.
Well, in Children of Time, one thing I'll compliment it on is I think the acting is great from everyone. I think
Times Orphan.
or yeah, I'm sorry, Time's Orphan, not Children of Time. That was a season 5 episode. There's
Yep,
too
yep.
much timey-wimey stuff. The funny thing that my two
Father, I can't
episodes,
believe you would speak out against time travel.
well, the ironic thing here, I love season 6 of DS9. I call this my favorite season in all of Star Trek. But
got a few least favorites.
the two episodes I really dislike are Time's Orphan, the time travel one, and then do you remember last week? It was Wrongs Darker Than whatever. It was too long of a title. Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night or whatever. But Kira going back in time to see her mom bang Gul Dukat. I hate that, and I don't dislike this as much, but I do dislike
Two
this one.
two time travel screw ups. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's fair. Let's talk
but-
about the B plot real quick that you do like.
Sure. Yeah, we have the Worf. More admission of how much of a terrible father he's been in the past, and his desire to prove he can do it. And of course, like the way he goes about it is like, oh, this is a duty. This is a mission that I must go on. I must perform this task with honor and strength. And
Well, you know what I liked about that, by the way, even though that's a little bit, we know it's a little Klingon cliche-ish, but you've seen those memes going around where like I don't know what Klingon it is, if it's Gowron or Martok or who, where he's like saying that your battle against depression or something like that is like that's such an unvanquishable foe. It's truly worthy of a warrior's honor that you fight this
that's
fight
a
every day.
Martok meme.
Martok. That it makes total sense, Martok. But this seemed. I was like, okay, going about like trying to get a kid to stop crying. Yes, that seems like a little silly. But like when you're that parent, I'm sure, and you're just at your wits' end, and you've been fighting that fight for hours. Yeah, it's like suffusing that with a little bit of romantic honor and Klingon honor, not the craziest thing in the world. I kind of like it.
No. Dave, I internalized a lot of that as a kid watching Worf, and so I think I probably got it from Worf. But I do that with so much stuff in my real life. I'll be like, I have to get all these screenshots in order for the Tex-Trek show Friday, or so I'll fail our audience, and I
You'll
kind of like frame
fail house
things.
fathery.
Yeah, I kind of like uh I always have, but it kind of gives me like drive and motivation to do stuff. I just have to frame
Huh?
it as like like obligation and dishonor and letting people down.
Interesting, Fatheree. I feel like my pop version of that is probably a little bit Spider-Man or X-Men stuff. That sort of never say die thing that those characters had when I was a kid. Um,
But
so
we get more of Worf, feeling the guilt. Again, like a lot of the stuff, like they don't always remind you of it. Like they don't remind you of, oh, it's just like when he was the 12-year-old boy who had too much fun playing soccer and accidentally like murdered someone when he headbutted another kid. But that's definitely got to be like going through Worf's mind here when he's like, oh, I was pretending to be a grunt beast, I think is what it was called. But and I chased Kiriyoshi and he bumped his head on the table. And see, anytime I try to have fun, something bad happens. Just like when he tried to have fun with Jadzia, and then he was like all worried about like her getting shot because he thought he wasn't being vigilant enough, and like that guilt. And it's cool to see him loosen up there.
mhm.
And then again here, I think at the end, Jadzia convinces him like, yeah, like don't worry about it, it's okay for you to have fun being a dad, playing around with little kids. We're gonna have a wonderful time with our children. I'm sure we're going to just live together and have a wonderful happy life after the war ends, and we'll have so many children, it'll just be perfect forever.
You know what? I'll say this. Even though that I think you're joking around how it sort of sounds a little bit like those "oh, I'm 2 weeks to retirement" kind of gags in movies,
Mm-hmm.
those tropes. Um, if I hadn't known that Jadzia was going to die, I don't think anything I would have seen in these episodes would make me think that's obvious, because they sometimes do let characters have families. Brian and Keiko have done it, and there's the cliche of those kind of cliches don't tend to always be what you think they're going to be in DS9. Um, so yeah, I don't think they telegraphed it necessarily too much. But in fact, the main thing is, like, you might have known that Ron Moore and some of those guys like to twist the knife when people are on the cusp of happiness.
um but yeah, I'll say some other good stuff about this episode. I complimented the acting earlier, and Colin Meaney's always great, but I thought Rosalind Chow and then the girl who plays 18-year-old Molly
Yeah,
did a good job. It's hard. That's a hard thing to do, like pretend to be a cave woman.
right.
Uh,
I
it's
felt like she
weird
might have
that
been like an actual, I don't know, maybe like a gymnast or something, to kind of do the movements that
well, she
she
turns
did,
cartwheels. That was probably something like
but
that was
also just vaulting.
when they were casting. They were probably like, you got to be able to turn cartwheels. So
Sure, but like, even beyond that, I felt like she was kind of vaulting around on trees, and
she
like
might have
she
had
had
some mime training. She might have been
that
like
would
one of
make
those
sense.
just very physical act, like Doug Jones, one of those types.
That acting feral, kind of doing the animalistic movements, like you would see more like as a caveman kind of thing. Yeah.
It's weird that her bangs are cut so obviously, and stuff like that, and she's clearly has like makeup on and stuff. But yeah, it's like Rick Berman wasn't gonna put a woman on Star Trek unless she was like kind of hot at least. So
Yeah.
when she goes crazy in Quark's bar and like she bites him on the ear, like
Yeah.
given we know like ears are kind of like a sex organ for
Oh
Ferengi, so
no.
it's like, yeah, it's like she just like bit someone on their junk or something.
That's
Sorry for being gross, but
oh no.
but we get like the Ferengi shriek that you like. He did the Ferengi scream when
that
that
that is
happened.
true.
If there's
That
ever
is
a time
true.
to do it, it would be when you get your ear bit, right?
Oh man. Yeah, no, I thought she acquitted herself well, and I think that's part of why in the end scene I was like, "Oh my god, why am I crying on this slightly cheeseball
Yeah,
episode?"
my biggest problem, the biggest hurdle for me is when like O'Brien is like, oh, let's just take her back, let's just abandon our child again, and I just was like, yeah, that was like a little lazy. It was the Deep Space Nine does a good job 99% of the time of it. It's a hard thing to do when you're writing, but the characters drive the story. The story doesn't drive the characters. And that felt like, okay, it doesn't make any sense for these characters to do this. They're just doing it because that's what the narrative needs them to do right here. And
Right.
I
And it
dislike
actually and it
that.
ended up doing a like little timey wimey thing that worked out for him.
Yeah.
Um, which I still did sort of like. I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do when she saw her younger self. I was like, oh, is this going to be some weird thing where she actually does at least have a version of herself, which she might not even know is her, to accompany her and to live this life? And then I was like, okay, I see what they're doing. She's gonna send her back and all that.
Yeah.
But as far as Keiko goes, there's a line, I jotted it down, where she says to O'Brien, she says, "Don't argue with me. I'm as stubborn as you. Now what are we gonna do?" And I like that. That is a quintessential parent who will do what they need to do for their kid line.
And I guess it does show, how the war is going at this point. It's like, oh, the Romulans are in the war. I guess we don't have to worry about the station getting taken over again. I guess Keiko and Molly and Kirayoshi can move back into the station, so they're back.
Yeah. Oh, is this the one where O'Brien early on says? I thought it was interesting where he said, like, if she's like, "What if the war heats up?" And he said, "Then I'll ask for a transfer and like I'll leave the station." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Perhaps they're setting stuff up for season 7 with that.
Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to do that. They've certainly shown how you can divide up the crew a little bit at the beginning of this season. So
Chester the cat also reappears in this episode.
Oh yeah, that's right. His
Keiko didn't seem too happy about, like, look at this cat that you got while we were away. I think the cat might have been keeping her up in the middle of the night or something. She seemed a little aggro towards that cat. Like
some people are. I don't know why.
You ready for our next to last episode?
Yep, let's hit it.
So this is going to be season 6, episode 25, "The Sound of Her Voice," teleplay by Ronald D. Moore, story by Pam Petraforte. Never know if I'm saying her name right, but I think
that kind of sounds good.
This is the second of 2 episodes that she has a credit on, so I don't have to worry about it. And no, sorry, Pam. I hope I got it right. And directed by Winrick Colby, the Defiant receives a distress call from a Starfleet captain stranded on an inhospitable planet. What did you think of this one, Dave?
I thought this was going to be, or very early on, I was like, oh, this is going to be some kind of trap. Like, there's like,
trap.
like, well, like the, what do you call it, in the Kobayashi Maru scenario or something, where I'm like, oh, like, did they lure them in? Is that possible?
That was Worf's concern. That's what Worf thought.
I wouldn't Worf on it, but I was like, oh, the plot is going to be that there's like this very clever AI that can, like mimic somebody so well that it's going to be great for traps and stuff. And I was like, about halfway through the episode, I was like, okay, this is for sure not a trap episode. This is about these characters kind of getting to reveal their internal issues of the moment through this kind of strong personality of a person in this dire situation. And I liked that premise pretty well. I think the only thing I sort of didn't like about the episode is it kind of just wraps up very quickly, and when they finally find her, there's not as much a deal made of it as I sort of felt like there should be. Like, it doesn't feel like, I don't know, that normal catharsis you get at an ending, especially one that ends kind of sadly.
Oh. I thought it was kind of a big deal for them to have, like, an Irish wake, and like that was.
I loved that. You know what? I take it back. It's almost like the actual moment of discovery is more like where I was like, oh, they're just kind of like, oh, huh, she must have, there must have been a time delay weird thing, and she's actually been dead for 3 years or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's still horrific, and I'm not quite sure what they achieved by that. I guess it meant that no matter how much they stepped on the gas, they couldn't have made it, right?
Yeah.
And that
also,
so they got their denial.
For the last like 8 or 9 months, they've just like are constantly being like, oh yeah, like a bunch of your friends on this ship are dead, and like this other person is dead, and your bunkmate at the academy, they just died, and
this is their shot to save somebody. I did think early on when she's like, hey, whoever rescues me is going to be my hero, and Cisco's like, tell her heroes are on the way. I
love that. That is,
but I was like, to me it was kind of like. You know, in Empire Strikes Back, when that dude who's like Luke's co-pilot goes, I feel like I could take on the whole Empire myself. And he is like, I'm 2 weeks to retirement. And he dies in about 10 seconds. I did feel like, oh, this is going to end badly. I just didn't know how, in what particular way it was going to end badly. Would it be a trap? Would it be that she died? what happened to her wasn't what I expected. Though, and I did like the Irish Wake a lot. I thought that was a perfect way to handle things,
Well,
and a perfect example of how Deep Space Nine would take what might have been a little bit too dry on TNG and gave it some liveliness and some real heart.
in our live audience, Dan Kiefer pointing out how great Deborah Wilson was, and she does the voice of Lisa Cusack. She actually was like there on set, but they didn't want
Mhm.
any of the actors to meet her until after they shot the episode. So she
I
would be like
saw
standing,
this.
yeah, she
I
would stand
read
like
that.
behind a wall or something.
I think
But
that's like a kind of genius thing to do.
yeah, that was clever, and she's been in Star Trek Prodigy very recently. She was that Klingon captain, Captain Trill, or however you say her name, that came
Like in the
that
big battle.
yeah that answered the distress call.
Oh, that's wild.
But she just does a ton of voice. Like she's does like acting like on screen acting. She was in Mad TV in the '90s.
Huh.
That was like the thing I knew her from. I think she actually like played Uhura in a skit on Mad TV at one point. But she did Star Trek stuff. She's a ton of video games. In fact, I just went and looked at like some of the recent games that she's been in, and it's games that I've been playing. She's in that other Star franchise, their Fallen Order game. She is
Yeah.
the Jedi, that ex Jedi lady.
Oh, really? Like
Um,
the lead,
yeah,
sort of
well,
one of the co-leads.
the not the yeah, she's in the main cast, but she's on the
Yeah.
ship with
Yeah.
Cal
Okay,
Kestis.
that's pretty notable.
Yeah, she's
Like that is a major character.
just last weekend I was playing a God of War Ragnarok, and I had a boss battle against a giant, and she voiced that giant. So that's how much work that she continues to do.
Man.
But yeah, it's just
So she's got a kind of a presence, right? That's clearly what people go to her for, and that was like the heart of this episode, which also felt like to me a slight refutation, especially since they would go on to mention counselors specifically, of the sort of counselor Troy approach. I sort of wish they hadn't felt the need to sort of take a dig like that, even though I also recognize that they missed about all of their opportunities with Troy, I think, to like make that character a potent character. So I sort of get it too. But yeah, I like the idea of this person who they are in constant contact with, who's in a pretty bad situation and is just wants someone to talk to. That's a
and
good
she seemed
premise.
like a cool person to talk. Like she's funny. Like when she pranks Bashir when he's like. When she pretended to be the monster and is like, "Oh, I ate her because you weren't paying attention."
Yes.
When she's like talking to Cisco and is telling a story about like her Endorian ex who kept pointing his antennae at her.
Yeah.
Just, funny stuff like that. I I think she was actually giving them all like good advice. So they actually like wrote her well. They put some thought into the advice she was giving people.
I would have actually killed for Troy to have been written that way back in TNG's days. And I hope I know that like in the books and stuff they probably at least gave her due and more like that.
Well, maybe Picard season 3 will explore Troy in ways that the
It'd
character
be nice.
deserves.
It'd be nice. I liked her appearance previously, so. But yeah, like that's a pretty good, solid, done in one episode right there.
Do you want to talk about like the B story stuff? Starting off with where they're spinning Morn around on the bar stool with Odo, debating the bar stool regulations with Quark.
I want a GIF of that. I feel like that GIF should be
That's
everywhere.
GIF-worthy. I like that the Jake Quark friendship, which they've actually have kind of built up throughout the season. They've gotten like a lot of scenes together. Sirach and Armin, like they're talking about like the Klingon wedding and stuff, like back in that episode, and then here where he's just trying to do character study stuff as a writer. He's like, yeah, like I just need to observe the criminal world so I can write my crime novel. And what do you think of that stuff?
I enjoyed it. I like the idea that he is a bit more roguish than his dad is, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of part of who he is.
Because he ain't Starfleet. He ain't like the by the book Starfleet
Right.
dude.
As far back as when he was like, "Dad, I meant to tell you, I've been dating someone and it's a Dabo girl or whatever," and I was like, "Oh, damn, kid." I've liked that Jake has a little bit of worldliness to him. Trek has a tendency to, with kids, to kind of write them all as like being a little on the kind of like goody goody naive side. They're all a little bit too Wesley-ish sometimes. And so yeah, I like that. It's not like Jake was like a criminal. He's just, like I said, he's just a little bit more a little bit more roguish than his dad. It's a side of him I like, and I'm trying to think. What is it? Quark is. Oh yeah, Quark is this one where Quark is just trying to get something past Odo?
Yeah, he's
Is that
trying
the
to
B
do a
story?
deal with the Denovan crystals. He's trying to sell these crystals to this wanted man, and he can only do it if Odo is going to be distracted on a date with Kira. But
Right. It's the anniversary that he's trying to like distract him with.
yeah, and he's confessing to Jake in the cargo bay. He's like, this would have been like my biggest score ever, and it's a shame that it's not going to happen, and that I'll probably be locked up tomorrow. And Odo overheard that, and then he gives him a pass, and Kira even asks him like, are you sure about this, Odo? And Odo is like yeah, he can have this one, just this one. That's all I'm gonna give him. But I love the as a kid, watching the stuff for the first time when it originally aired, I really really loved these episodes. Like I was also a big fan, if you remember, when Odo and Quark are stranded on the planet in season
Yeah.
5. No,
Yeah.
season 4. That was in season
Their
4.
survivalist
Yeah,
adventure.
the name of it escapes me at the moment. I
It's
should
not like
remember
the
it because it's
mountain or
one I really
something, is
like.
it?
No, it's not the
Okay.
mountain, but
Okay.
it's. I think it's a one word. Ascent. Ascent. I think
Right.
it's
I
Ascent.
knew it was
Yeah.
something like, yeah, themed
Yeah.
around it. Anyway, yeah.
And I loved this here. There's a scene, just a quick scene in season 7. Whenever we get to it, I'll point it out. Like, yeah, like I loved that too. But yeah, and it is showing how Kira has gotten Odo to loosen up. Much like I praise change of heart when it's like, yeah, like look how much Worf loves Jadzia. Like the one thing that he cares more about than duty and honor is his wife, is his Parmakai. It's like, yeah, like what is the one thing that might make Odo, forget about trying to bust Quark's ass and forget about, enforcing the law. It's like, oh, that's how much he loves Kira. That like that other stuff doesn't seem as important.
Yep.
And it was a fairly
Uh,
harmless crime, right? It's just like some crystals, like that. That's not too dangerous to society. I guess I don't
so-
know. I assume it isn't.
it's not. Yeah, I don't think he was like moving opioids. I don't think it was
Yeah,
fentanyl, space fentanyl or anything.
It- it's a
Yeah.
harmless crime.
Right. Not generally the kind of thing he would normally consider harmless, but from something where he can. The new Odo, the post Fontaine
Hmm.
Odo, might be able to see that a little bit more, and the glow of love,
And I
Odo.
guess the last thing I'll say on this episode is something about the Ace story that I forgot to mention, but the friendship with just someone that you don't even see, you're just like hearing their voice and communicating long distance like that. I think that also shows how we can have these very meaningful connections online through
Hmm.
technology
One of those
across,
prescient
yeah,
things.
across these vast distances now. So it's
Yeah, and I
you know
know that like it's not like the online world didn't exist then, but it was nascent. It
yeah
was
it,
still getting there.
and thank God that we had that with the COVID pandemic. Imagine how isolating that would have been if it had happened just even 10 years earlier. The
Oh,
the online world wouldn't have been nearly what it was. So
yeah, yeah. It was kind of a way to stay sane, and it was up and running at least. People there was like memes about COVID during COVID. It kind of seems like the kind of
yeah,
thing you would almost normally good taste would demand that you wait till afterwards, but that's just not how things are. So there was like a zillion memes about it within the time. So yeah, it can absolutely be a thing that brings us together and gets us through some tough shit. So raise a glass for her.
well, yeah, we can toast at the Irish wake. Um. Oh, I know I said that was my last thing, but I just remembered something else. Is when O'Brien is giving his toast And
Mhm.
as Dan Kiefer also pointed out, that Colomini did seem actually drunk. It's like, yeah, like Irishman. I'm sure he's been to a few Irish wakes. He knew how to play that. But
Sure.
when he says, one day, one of us isn't going to be here, it cuts to Jadzia when he says that.
Oh. Oh shit.
Foreshadowing the next episode. This brings us to the end of our 26th episode journey through season 6. But Tears of the Prophets, written by Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler, directed by Alan Craker, Sisko leads an invasion of Cardassian territory, ignoring a warning from the Prophets, with fatal consequences for a member of the DS9 crew. So, what do you think?
Great battle episode. Really some of the coolest special effects I've ever seen in Trek. I was real quick. I thought Ducat's transformation was slightly puzzling as he became a Nazgul. And I wasn't entirely clear. I almost felt like maybe I missed a line in there on exactly what he was doing to sort of sever that link to the prophets. It seemed like some mystical mumbo jumbo.
Okay. Well, I can
You can fill me in a little
shed
bit.
some light on that stuff, but
I believe. Well, sorry. Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, like, it sounds like you're mixed on this episode, which is where I'm at. There's stuff in it I really like. There's stuff in it
For
I'm
sure.
not a fan of.
I honestly, the big thing is that I didn't quite. I felt like Dax's death actually is a little bit of a letdown as far as like emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
Not wholly, but it's just like in a show that I know can get to me. It didn't quite. It didn't quite do it.
Yeah, and even the Dax death, I'm mixed on. I like parts of it. I dislike other parts of it. So we can unpack all of this, though. I will say that this is my least favorite of all the Deep Space Nine season finales.
Mm.
And I chalk that up as just this was kind of a rough patch of episodes. Part of it was like the writers didn't want to get rid of Terry. They loved the stuff they were doing with her and Worf. They
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do more Jadzia stuff going forward. And it's sad that they weren't able to do that. Although I think some of the things we get in season 7 are things I'm actually a big fan of. So it
What was
kind of
she
works
wanting
out,
to
but...
do? What led her to depart?
Okay, well let's I guess let's get into the big
Okay,
stuff with the
sure. Let's get
death.
into the weeds.
But that was a contract negotiation thing, and the story is pretty well told. It's well documented. I do encourage people not to just take my word for it, though. Please go seek out Terry Farrell's actual comments on this. She's talked about it a lot in recent years, so it's out there. But just the quick version of it, the actors were signed for 6 seasons, and they get to season 6. It's like, okay, we're gonna do a 7th season, and I don't know what all actors were given what, but Terry Farrell has said that she was given a take it or leave it offer, and she asked, can I at least have a conversation about possible negotiations or something? I feel like I should at least be given that. And Rick Berman was very firm about not wanting that. He's like, no, it's take it or he's like, we'll give you X amount of money if you sign up for another season, and if you don't want that, then there's the door. And then she asked, well, what if I'm not a regular? What if I only do 13 episodes instead of the 26? And Rick Berman, and he's defended this since then. When he tells his side of the story, he says yeah, that wouldn't have been possible. You can't just be on the station sometimes, not all the time, which is total bullshit. Because Rom's a recurring character, Lita's a recurring character, Garrick's Mark. There's tons of guys that we see them sometimes, and sometimes we don't. That should have been fine. Just she had to go to the Trill homeworld because she's pregnant, and she had to go hang out there for a few months or something. I mean, I just thought of that off the top of my head right now. That's total bullshit. And Terry Farrell said Rick Berman would berate her. He would tell her things like, if it wasn't for this show, you'd be working at Kmart. No other show would hire you. What, you think you're gonna leave my Star Trek show and go do movies or something? You'd be a nobody without us. He told her you're not even that good looking, stuff he's my secretary over I apologize for this gross story, but this is a well-documented thing that Terry Farrell said multiple times. Rick Berman told her look at my secretary and how she has such nicer boobs than you, and you think you could make it big as an actor, if you walk out on this show. Like that, it's really terrible. The stuff that Rick Berman said
That's
and did.
awful. Talk about like a case of Trek's behind the scenes not living up to the stories they're
Yeah,
telling. That's
and it's
gross.
not just Terry Farrell who has like these stories of Rick Berman. Kate Mulgrew has said a lot of things about it. Denise
Yeah.
Crosby, Jerry Ryan. Like it's so I believe what Terry Farrell says. The problem though is that no one else knew about. Like Ira Stephen Bear didn't know that's what transpired. Um,
Yeah.
he
A
said
lot of times people like that. That's the kind of thing that they rely upon
mhm.
is that they have the command of the situation, and that especially in that era, and even now, even post Me Too movement and stuff like that, that it's women are not going to always be taken at their word, or there's still going to be like, oh, are you sure it wasn't just a hormones thing, or it's like something like that. Like
Yeah.
there's a pretty extreme power imbalance.
And I think it's something that if Ira Stephen Bear has said, like, yeah, like if, like, I think it was Hans Beimler, one of the other writers that worked closely with Ira, like, he said, like, yeah, when Ira Stephen Bear learned, like, he was livid, he was pissed. I think if Avery Brooks knew about this, like, I think he might have been able to say something to Rick but yeah, the thing, like, they weren't communicating, I guess, like, I don't blame Terry Farrell for that either. Like, I don't think that, she probably felt uncomfortable, if she had to talk to these people about this stuff. And,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, she's actually like crying, like when she's dying with, in the scene when she's playing Jadzia dying on the deathbed, like she's actually crying. Like she said, like she did not want to go, but she just kind of felt like she was, forced into this. And
Yeah.
like, and Rick Berman was totally wrong. She got another job immediately on the TV show Becker with a dude from Cheers. What's his name?
Sam Malone.
Sam on Cheers.
Well,
the actor.
yeah, I suddenly couldn't say it either. Somebody in the audience say who it is. He's a great actor. He's awesome.
But yeah,
Good place.
and me as the kid watching this in 1998, I was so mad at Terry Farrell because the things that like we had been told is that like yeah there's going to be a final seventh season of DS9 and everyone's returning except the actor Terry Farrell chose to not return. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. It's Ted Danson because we're too dumb to remember that. But thanks for having our back there. But yeah, so the thing that they were telling people is like yeah. Terry Farrell won't be back. They're going to have a new character take the place of Jadzia Dax in season 7. And I was so disappointed. I was like, wow, Terry Farrell, you couldn't have stayed for just one more season. I obviously didn't know the full story at the time.
But that's a lot of times how we'll kind of react. And then maybe that also tells us something about the 90s that would be your assumption, right? Your kid too. But yeah, that you're like, nice way to ruin the good time, Terry Farrell. Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, but that's all pretty terrible. However, I will say that I think the way that some of the characters react to her loss, to the loss of Jadzia in season 7, I really like that.
Okay.
I like the stuff that they do with the new character that we get in her place.
Yeah,
so
I will be interested to see. Was it Ezri?
Mm-hmm. So I think it does, work out for the show, for the context of the show and the bigger picture. It does work out. But yeah, I think like Ducat
that's maybe a bit more
little...
of a case of like how they were able, shows how good they could roll with something.
How they could make lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah.
But some other good stuff I'll say. I like they show the Klingons and the Starfleet working with Romulans and how like there's like a lot of tension and that's not always easy.
I love this scene.
Yeah.
The war room scene. I know that Jill in our audience has a crush on this Romulan guy, and I don't know who that actor was, but I wanted to look him up because he had a lot of presence right out of the gate. The Romulan
he might
senator.
be the dude I'm thinking of who got Alzheimer's and had to retire from acting.
Maybe so, but yeah, he kind of reminded me. Like we know it's not like the same voice as like Michael and Sarah, but when I sort of think of people with commanding presences, he's always at the top of the list. But yeah, he had something of that, and his kind of cruelty toward the Klingons is good. It's like great character work. He's kind of horrific, but you immediately see the difference between everybody in the room. You have the sort of stolid Federation guys, the the Klingons that are bristling under this sort of cooperation, and the ultra political maneuvers and somewhat sadistic Romulans.
They write Martok really well in that scene too, because he wouldn't feel like a genuine Klingon if he didn't like show like some extreme frustration with the Romulans. But like they didn't make him like too big of a dick that like he doesn't like ruin like their alliance or anything.
Right.
I also like when Martok says that they'll be drinking blood wine in the halls of Central Command on Cardassia Prime in a year. It's like Martok, do you know that this show runs for exactly 7 seasons? But right when he says that, it does like that smash cut to Central Command where we see Wayoon and Damar. You know, Damar now. I think they've already promoted him to. He's Legate Damar, so he's not a Goal anymore. He's Legate, so it's like the equivalent of a general or an admiral. But yeah, and Dukat, you know, shows back up, just walks into Central Command, and Damar gets, you know, real defensive at first when he's like, Dukat, if this is about your daughter, like he's like, oh no, did this guy like come to like get revenge on me?
I would assume he did.
But, yeah, but Dukat seems to have He seems to have bigger plans than
I
petty
exist
revenge.
in a state of complete clarity, clarity I intend to share with the universe.
It's like, did he just like get high for the first time? Like, what's going on there? No,
did you know that we are all one?
the thing that I stressed 2 weeks ago when we talked about the first few episodes of season 6 that I stressed everyone pay attention to and keep in mind is that Dukat should have won when they had captured the station, when they were fighting the Federation and the Klingon forces trying to retake it. They threw everything at them. The Starfleet ships, the Klingon ships, they left Earth vulnerable. They left Kronos vulnerable. They did like this big, massive invasion to recapture Deep Space Nine. They had so many things, had to go right to pull that off. They had Jake, smuggling out messages through Morn. They had Quark and Zial getting involved in the resistance, putting their lives on the line. One of them actually dying in that process to rescue Kira and Rom. Rom being able to know what to do to bring down the deflector. Like all of that stuff had to happen. And Dukat still he should have won. He got those mines down in time. He had that big-ass Dominion fleet ready to come through the wormhole, and they should have just wiped out all of the Federation, all of the Klingon Empire. It should have been Dukat sitting on his throne on Empok Nor, lording over the Bajorans, and just looking out at like the ruins of the Federation and the Klingon Empire, being like, look, I won. I was the best.
And they'd finally love him.
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm sure that's the story he tells himself of what would have happened. But because Sisko had these space gods, it didn't happen. And that was the deciding factor. And so it's like, okay, Sisko, you have these space gods on your side. Well, I guess I'm going to need some space gods on my side.
Right.
And so what I keep telling you how they're realigning things for the final season and for what will be the big ending of everything. And Dukat has in his madness, the madness he was driven into from experiencing the death of his child. I guess now that Sisko is the emissary of the prophets, Dukat has decided he's going to team up with the Pa Wraiths, and what we get in season 7 is Gul Dukat, the emissary of the Pa Wraiths.
That sounds pretty cool. I gotta say, and something I never would have expected. So something, and that's one of my what I think the greatest virtues of Deep Space Nine is that I cannot always see the shape of the story, that it will go in places I did not expect.
And what happens with the wormhole here, because I think it is a little confusing and unclear, but just the best way I can explain it is, he had the relic that was kept on Cardassia. We know that it's like the British Museum, keeping all these
sure.
discoveries from, Africa and Asia or whatever. It's basically that. But what he
only it's villainous when they do it. It's not villainous when England does it.
And well, a lot of people would disagree with that.
I say that with biting sarcasm.
I think the Costa Majin Pa Wraith that possessed Jake in The Reckoning, I think when they're not allowed to have that final battle from the chronoton radiation and it's driven away, I think it teamed up with Dukat. I think it's like when we're going to talk about comics again. Eddie Brock and the
Venom.
Venom
Yep.
when they're like, "Oh, we both hate Peter Parker. Let's team up." It's like, yeah, it's basically like a supervillain team up. But Dukat's able to use this artifact. It releases a Pa Wraith. He's able to neutralize the orbs and basically shut down the wormhole, cut Cisco off from the space gods, and kill Jadzia in the process.
Right. She just happened. She walked in at the wrong time, right?
Yeah, it's like Jadzia. You're gonna go like pray to these prophets that you have never like worshipped before, but I guess now
She wants to have kids. She wants to have kids.
And the writers, like, I don't blame them too much because it's like they were just scrambling. We got to make up something to kill her, and I guess it wasn't a good idea, but like they just had to go with whatever they had. It was a very like last minute decision, I think.
But just a few episodes prior, she had been saying, "Benjamin, why are you calling them the prophets? They're the wormhole aliens."
Yeah. But I get like, oh, well, maybe these aliens did have something to do with it, and they heard my friend Kira's prayer, so I'm just going to go tell them thank you just in case.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really buy that, but...
she you could say this. She's made up of so many different entities and memories. You could see how that there would be at least some openness when she's sort of like in this kind of vulnerable state of really wanting something, really feeling her heart moved. So maybe so.
I think it would have made more sense to kill her like on the mission, to make like capturing Chintaka like a costly victory.
Yeah,
but that's just me. Let's talk about like the battle for a little bit because that is like an important thing for the war. If you're following this 2-year war and like the events and everything, we were kind of recapping some of that earlier, talking about like the capture of the station, the loss of the station, struggling to contain the Dominion within Cardassian space, and then now that the Romulans are on our side, we finally have enough firepower that we can take some of that Cardassian territory ourselves and make them be the ones on defense. We'll be on offense. We can capture this Chintaka system and kind of use that as like a launching point to go deeper into Cardassian space. So that was the plan here, and I love that battle with the orbital weapon platforms and how they
look for something that's really kind of like a thrown in at the last moment. It's a technology we don't really see before. They look impressive. Yeah. They read as like what you want in a scene like this is like, oh, those are dangerous.
It's a simple objective too. It's like, okay, we have to destroy these weapon platforms so that we can capture the system, and it's like, oh, we can just trick them all into like shooting at their power source. So it's kind of like they do like the Star Trek thing of like, oh, we'll use like our knowledge and our science and our technology to win the day. So I liked all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if I buy like Cisco like allowing Jake to come on this super even though he's like a grown man and he's a reporter now. That still kind of seems like a bit much.
Am I correct that had no story consequences? Like he doesn't get killed, he doesn't get hurt. We don't see him on the bridge even, do we?
He is on the bridge, and then when Cisco has that vision of like the wormhole being cut off,
he escorts him.
Yeah, so the guy who like wanted to be there in all the action, I do like that actually. He like it was like very important to him to like be like documenting the action from the front lines, but like when his dad was unwell, it's like, nope, dad is priority. Got to get dad to sickbay.
Yeah.
So I liked that.
You know what? Just on a pure visual level, I thought like all the what do you call it? The Dominion ships going very kamikaze.
The Jim Haddard kamikaze and the Klingons.
They looked so good. That Vorcha ship getting wrecked by it was pretty stunning looking. And I know that you are not a Galaxy class ship fan, but I liked seeing the Galaxy class ships doing some work here. I see in the audiences that Dan Kiefer is talking about the Excelsior class getting its moment. But just man, that is a good looking space battle.
Yeah, and we see more of those orbital weapon platforms in season 7. They'll show up again, not in like a huge way, but if you pay attention to some of the space battle stuff, you'll see some of them floating around.
They spit out photons, right?
They have energy beam weapon. They have phasers on them, I think.
Oh, okay. No, I thought they were specifically had a bunch of photons.
They might do both.
And
actually.
Good shields generally.
But yeah, the prophets told Cisco, they're like, don't go into this battle, and he goes anyways. And Admiral Ross made him choose. It's like you're either the Starfleet officer or the emissary, and I need you to be the Starfleet officer and follow these orders. I kind of wish the prophets would have told him like one of your friends is gonna die if you leave, but the prophets are actually like they're generally not that vague. Like they do. I think sometimes like they don't really know how to communicate. Like they're like, "Why are you trying to end the game?" When Cisco's trying to kill himself. Like okay, like their terminology's a little off, but they tend to like not be like very vague. But sometimes like okay, a bit more information would help.
Yeah.
I appreciate the directness, but give us a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I guess I have to ultimately. That's one of those things I have to get to the end of the season and sort of see what they do with them, because they have been very mysterious in general, but yes, like not utter riddles. You usually can at least sort of see the shape of what they're trying to get out of a conversation.
Yeah. They don't do the cliche thing that they do like a lot of stuff that deals with like I don't know like visions and mysterious supernatural forces. Like they don't do like the what does it all mean? Maybe there's a bit of that early on, but that's always through like like some like Bajoran priest interpreted this prophecy this way. It's right. Never like when they're communicating directly. So I do appreciate that, but it's like in The Reckoning when Cisco's like, I just wish you would tell me what to do. But then all of a sudden he gets like an urge to like smash the tablet. So it's like, They did tell you what to do in that moment, but it'd be cool if they would just like send you an email with detailed instructions. They're not quite on that level of communication.
Somehow gods aren't great at communicating.
Yeah. But now they can't communicate at all. Now they're cut off. Cisco is totally separate from them. He's lost his space gods. He's lost the old man.
Who was it? Who was the? I mean, cutting enemy communications is always a big thing. But wasn't there one of the Civil War generals that took down all like the telegraph lines and stuff like that? This is out of my area of expertise. I was just trying to think of people who famously did that. Anyway, but yeah, clearly an effective move on Ducat's part.
Yeah, so Ducat making big waves, even if he's not part of like the Dominion at the moment. He's kind of like he's kind of a free agent. He's this rogue actor, but yeah, he does the Dominion a big solid. He's like, I'm gonna take out the space gods and.
Well, they're not. They don't yet know how solid it is, though. Wei Yun seems to be like, we'll see.
Yeah, but he has some optimism. He's like,
yeah,
doesn't he say like, I think I owe you an apology.
I thought that was when wasn't that when the what do you
call
it?
No, that was the Chintaka stuff.
That was when the weapons were online, and he thought that was going to be the win for him.
Yeah, no, he was like Damar thought his weapon platforms would save the day, and that
Ducat says,
false.
"I just got you a big win," and he's like, "We just lost." I think he's not buying into it just yet.
Yeah.
But we do see, the viewers, see what Wei Yun doesn't, which is that Cisco has become unmoored. He's got to go and kind of find himself, and
I love the cliffhanger ending of him going back to the restaurant in New Orleans.
Yeah, I can recognize when a line is meant to have multiple, like a deeper meaning, and still really like it. It's not like I say like, oh, what a writerly moment every single time. When Jake comes out and he says something like, he's like, are you ready to come back in yet? And he's like, not yet, or whatever, I'm like, like that is definitely a line with some multiple meanings.
When he's sitting outside, like scrubbing clams, I guess.
Okay.
I used to think he was
wasn't
like
quite
peeling
sure
potatoes,
what he was doing.
but yeah, he's scrubbing clams. But the cool thing at the end of season 5, when the station is taken by the Dominion. When Ducat is like, oh, look, Captain Cisco left his baseball. I guess that means he's going to come back. And then here they do the opposite of that when Kira's like, oh, shit, he took the baseball with him. That means he might not come back.
Yeah, that's pretty clever for a cliffhanger to have, like, they built up the baseball as a symbol. I almost kind of wish they hadn't had her say it in words, but, since we had seen the symbol so much. And now, now if they had done the they would probably show it in flashbacks a whole bunch, so we'd be really thinking about that baseball a lot, so that she could have just been like, I'm not sure if he's coming back, and then they could have just cut to the empty spot, and it would have been enough to do that. I sort of wish they had done it that way, but because I picked up what they were talking about. But in the 90s, when there was, you couldn't quite count on that level of audience knowledge of the big picture.
Well, that was, I think, one of the problems with DS9 getting more recognition today than it got back during its run. But
Sure.
I said early on, like as soon as that alien recreation of the famous 21st century baseball player for the London Kings, Buck Bukai, showed up and handed Sisko that baseball, I always told you, I was like, keep your eye on the ball. There's going to be some fun stuff with the baseball. And there's more cool stuff with it in season 7. But I love when Dukat thinks he's going to take back over the station and he flips it off of the desk in Civil Defense. When the station trying to kill everyone episode that got famously memed. I love like Sisko leaving it behind as a message to Dukat that like I'm coming back. Keep the seat at my desk warm. I'm coming back for it. And then like I love its use here. I love what they do with it in season 7. And this sad Sisko, and he's like, I just need. I failed as the Starfleet officer. I guess he won as a Starfleet officer, but like he failed as the emissary in order to do that duty. He's
lost one of his closest friends.
I guess Dax has been like the one like stable thing throughout his life from the time he was a young man, and he just needs to like go home to where things are simple and make sense. And the hardest thing you have to do is just like scrub some clams. I get that feeling, and I'm envious of people that can like return to their childhood homes and stuff. I think like when I feel like overwhelmed and stuff, I wish I could like be a little kid again, like go out to like my grandparents and hang out there, or like just return to the basics on stuff like that. And I
scrub some clams.
Yeah, I mean I probably would have been working cows, but because I didn't grow up at a Creole restaurant, but. At the time I was very it was one of those like, shit, I gotta wait like all summer to see what happens next. So it's definitely like did its job as like a cliffhanger to keep me enticed and eager to come back.
It's pretty good. This one was interesting because there's no it's not like a decisive loss for anyone. It's like a military win for the Federation and its allies. It's a moral loss for Sisko. It's Dukat is poised for ascendancy. So nothing is like, it's still, everything is still chaos, right? You can't like say like anybody is clearly gonna like on in the winning seat right now. And I'll say this, the loss of Dax does indicate, there's a certain quality it brings that, yes, sometimes just to remind you it's a wartime situation, it makes sense.
Yeah, and there's high stakes, there's death, Zial died, Dax died, no one's safe in season 7. That was something I was keenly aware of going into season 7. I was like, oh no, this is the last season of the show, any of these people could die at any episode. So
I liked that that sort of it's not that's the first time we've seen Klingons do this, but Worf singing over Jadzia couldn't help but remind me of like kind of like that epic quality of like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings singing over Boromir's body. It's that's some pretty cool epic warrior stuff. I like it.
The Klingon prayer. You can actually like go online and like read like the translation of what he says during that.
I kind of like to see that.
I like that they did like the Klingon death cry. So that was I was like, I remember like watching that at the time and just being like, oh yeah, good continuity there. They used the Klingon death cry. Maybe we hear a Klingon death cry again in season 7. But that'll be another discussion for another time. You got anything else on this, or are we done?
I don't think so. We didn't really touch on the B plot in there, or some of the B plot with was it there was some little more stuff with
Bashir and Quark going to Vic Fontaine and being like, we're sad that Jadzia's happy with Worf. That's the thing I dislike. What
I
they should have
get
done?
it.
I got a fix for it though. They should have put that at the end, and like they're sad that that she's dead,
Right.
and maybe they kind of like bond, or like we were both in love with this woman and jealous she was married to someone else, but now we mourn her death.
Um, Father, have you ever seen the movie from Luc Besson, La Femme Nikita?
I watched like the TV show that was on USA back in the
Sure.
night, back when Deep Space Nine was on.
That's funny. It was also
that's-
remade in America as Point of No Return. Anyway, point is, there's two people that kind of end up entwined in her life, and they're actually both halfway decent people. And in the end, neither of them, I guess, get her. I don't think she dies, but she has to move on or something. Neither of them get her. Maybe she does die. Fuck, I can't even remember. But there's you see them talking about her, and there is a sort of bond between them. They shared. We both loved her. We both can acknowledge each other, and we don't have to fight over it. And I kind of like when stories can pull that sort of thing off. So yeah, I think I would have liked that. If nothing else, this does sort of seem to further the yes, Quark definitely had real feelings for her. But yeah, it's too bad that we don't. I don't know. Is season 7 maybe going to show any more fallout from Dax, like more responses and stuff?
Yeah. That becomes a huge thing right off the bat in early season 7.
Cool. I won't. I don't want to know too much. We'll. Yeah. In our comments, Dan is quoting the. What's the song? The losers thing. The
Here's to the losers.
Here's to the losers. Yeah, I was like, that's that Vic Fontaine. Sometimes he can cut with like a knife. Yeah, I will. I will look forward to seeing some follow through on Dax, since I didn't quite get what I wanted out of it in this one.
Yeah, and I do enjoy like the stuff that we get in season 7 more. So speaking of that, we will be back next week to discuss the next 8 episodes, the first 8 of DS9 season 7. So that's going to be everything from Image in the Sand through the season 7 episode 8, the Siege. I can never say that word. Siege. Like siege, right? If you're like conquering something, if you're taking over territory. Okay.
Yeah, that's
the
right.
Siege of AR-558.
Okay. I don't know what that means. Let's do it.
Well, you'll find out. But yeah, it's I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm sad that we're so close to the end of DS9. It's kind of heartbreaking for me. I don't want to say goodbye to it, but I'm sure this won't be my final rewatch. I'll never stop rewatching Star Trek as long as I live.
There's always the viewing number 48, Fatheree.
Yeah, well, this is my 40s, as I say, my 47th. And Jill 47, yeah, it's going to be the first 8 episodes. So that's how we're going to start season 7 with the first 8. But we'll have plenty of new Star Trek later in the year. Of course, we have Picard season 3 just weeks away. A new season of Strange New Worlds. New seasons of Discovery and Lower Decks and Prodigy, so plenty to keep us occupied all year long. But yeah, DS9 Season 7 starting next week. Live Friday, 7 p.m. Central, or listen to us later, wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.